Greetings gamers, and welcome to the 128th live stream for the Misfit Gamer Studios. I'm your host Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today's episode, we're going to kind of do a looser history of, we got a couple different topics, and we're just going to kind of spread them out over the whole stream instead of just trying to do one consolidated deep dive. These topics were really kind of more loosely researched, and realistically, they're not really content heavy. So we're going to be going into, as the title says, the history of concentration, general spellcasting, and cantrips. And the reason that we're doing this in this particular way is because we've already done several episodes over a variety of different magic types. We've done the history of bards, druids, meta magic, ritual casting. I've already forgotten half the other ones that we did, but I think we've done 14 history ofs, and I think at least 6 or 7 of them, at least half of them, were all magic based. So I know we've covered so much, so we didn't want to do a huge deep dive into everything. A lot of the stuff is going to be kind of covering a lot of what we've already discussed, but we wanted to kind of look specifically at these aspects of spellcasting, mainly concentration and cantrips, because I don't think we specifically covered those previously. And then more as just a generalized overview, we're also going to go over spellcasting more as a summary to kind of remind everybody what we've gone through before. But other than that, we do have a quick update for you. So let me get Kage in here for this.
Shalom, shalom, my friends. What's happening? How's everybody doing?
Okay, so that's more for the bow. Yeah, Soul, you got me thinking that I need to actually figure out if I can put in logic in Stream Elements to actually do a command to roll dice.
That would be very interesting.
So I'm gonna have to look into that to see if we can actually have chat roll dice there, or do I have to get some sort of like third-party built-in plugin? Because I'm sure I know I've seen people do it like on the screen, right? They have like a thing where it'll do an overlay, and roll dice on the screen, but I don't know if we can have chat do it yet, so.
Okay, that's that should definitely go on the list.
But quick update for everybody: the community stream that we are hosting on October 20th, Sunday, October 20th. There's only 3 days left to vote for what we are going to discuss.
Yeah.
So, as
please,
of
please
right
get your
now,
vote in.
If you want to vote, get into the Discord. Link will be in chat if you are not part of the Discord. If you were new, but if you want to get in there, go to the Community Ideas channel, and the most recent thread in there is the Community Streams thread that has our most recent poll. And right now we still only have 6 votes. Pop culture builds is the current thing, leading by 1 vote. So as of right now, 3 days left. If that sticks, then pop culture build will be the episode that we do on the 20th.
All right.
But remember to get in there and cast your
I'm
vote.
not mad at pop culture builds.
I'm not mad at it either. I'm actually really excited for it. I just want to make sure, because there's only 6, and I know we got a lot more people that could be jumping into votes. So
come on now, let me know what you think, folks.
Yeah, it's a little bit messy in that channel, but yeah, get in there, vote, do your part.
Do your part.
MGS wants you.
Exactly.
But I think that was it. I think that's like the main update. Everything else has been kind of going pretty smoothly with all the other schedules, and the back room. Hopefully, the cave wall, haven't been able to work on that in over a month, but I am hoping that I will be able to do the final coat this weekend. I'm hoping that if it goes relatively well, I'll be able to get the final plaster coating on, which means that if not on Monday, next weekend for sure I'll be painting. So
very nice.
That's all I have to do.
Very nice.
So this weekend's going to be focused a lot on just trying to get that figured out, because once painted, then I cannot wait to start doing actual streams in there, get it set up properly. So
it'll be fun.
Exciting things coming in the future, everyone. Hopefully
I'm here for it.
Everybody is here for that. We are very excited to extend what we're doing stream wise. Okay, so I think that was it, right? Yeah, that was the only thing I think we needed to cover right out the gate.
Okay. Legit. Too legit to quit. But yes, I'm very excited about this topic today. I think because I do have like thoughts and ideas. I know you and I had mentioned, having some sort of item or something that could hold concentration for you, kind of like we were talking about in psionics and things like that. But
Right.
just the idea of like what exactly concentration is / would require in order for something like that to happen. So I'm curious to see what some of this research will unfold.
And that's really where the conversation came from. Is the other day, I think it was on Monday actually, when we were streaming, and we had talked, I think it was Monday or last Friday, I can't remember which one it was, that we had made the comment about concentration and how that mechanic works. You know, for me, it sounds strange that something could cast a spell for you, but then you would maintain concentration on like something that you weren't a part of. Like the way I envision magic happening is very strange to me, that something else would do something and then you're the thing that keeps it going. It's just it was detached in a way that I wanted to look into it more. And yeah, when I did look into it, basically, yeah, rules is written if any item can cast a concentration spell. So you can have a ring, a wand, anything that has charges, they can all be concentration spells, but once cast, it's the caster who must maintain concentration.
Whoever's using the item.
So yeah, in realistic, I couldn't find in my quick search, I couldn't find anything that lore wise was explained that like really explained this. Like in terms of, I don't think they've really gone out of their way to try and figure out if it makes sense. Just more of a
this is
concentration
just
needs to hold over to all. So therefore, you know, we're just going to give, even if you cast it through a ring or through a wand or anything. You know, I really do like the idea, like we were talking about, something akin to a magical item or an accessory, or even during the creation process of a magical item, having it be able to maintain a level of concentration or have some sort of ability to aid in that. That would be kind of nice.
Yeah.
Mainly just for, I mean, realistically, it is for the stacking purpose. So let's be honest.
Very much so, but like, I mean, or see, I'm curious how dependent concentration is for certain things, we'll say lore wise, because I would be interested to see if an item could just remove the need for concentration. Because
I mean, that's really what we're talking about, right? Like the idea of it holding concentration for you. Well, really, what does that mean? Unless the item breaks, it's going to hold concentration, right? Like if an inanimate object holding concentration is essentially, mechanically speaking, removing the need for concentration. Because unless the mechanical item was itself,
unless you could be targeted in some way, like say if somebody knew that the wand was holding concentration on some spell, and so instead of targeting the person, they targeted the wand for an attack.
Here's a question for you. Here's a question.
Because that's something I would probably try.
Chime in on chat what you guys think about this. Mechanically speaking, because we know that language has a barrier, spell casting has a barrier, speaking has a barrier. In terms of intelligence, what do you think, justifiably, what do you think is the minimum requirement for a concentration?
Minimum intelligence requirement?
Yeah. For the idea of you have to be intelligent enough to know you need to maintain concentration. Intelligent enough to know what you're concentrating on. Like, because you know how there's a certain point where you could lose the ability to speak? Because it's like, so
you are low enough intelligence where you lose the ability to,
would you need to be able to speak to hold concentration, or is speech a more complex idea than I need to pay attention to this feeling or this idea?
Yes, I would say I could not have the ability to speak, but also have the ability to concentrate.
Okay, excellent. Does anybody know, or can you look up real quick, because I think you're faster with that, what is the minimum intelligence? I want to say it's 5. I think anything less than 5 and you lose the ability to speak.
I thought it was I think less than 5, we should be 4 and below. That's what I think it is.
I believe that's what it is. I think once you've lost 5, or any creature that's below 5, because usually creatures can be up to, I think, 3 usually without speaking. 4 are like highly intelligent creatures, whereas then 5 you have speaking creatures, I believe.
Yeah, well, I'd say there are some non-speaking creatures that are above a 5, I think. Some like certain beasts or creatures.
If I can Intelligence. Oh, minimum intelligence speak. I don't know if I trust you. Didn't have any of the normal average intelligence. Okay, so animal level instinct is 1 or 2.
Okay.
Understanding speech has a score of at least 3. 0 is comatose.
Wild.
So, minimum 3 to understand language, right? So maybe at least 4 to do concentration, because you have to be able to understand language. You have to be able to understand and comprehend the need and the concept behind the concentration, right? So even if it's complex, you could say even 5. I'm just trying to get a ballpark.
Okay.
What do we think constitutes as concentration?
I would say
it's going somewhere. It's going somewhere, but I want to get to that point.
Okay.
But this doesn't say. It says understand, but this one didn't say. I don't think there's a rule for when you can speak.
For when you like lose that capability.
See, anybody in chat? Aki with the 3rd. Let me get to that too. Let's see here. So, okay. So technically 3 is the bare minimum. You're capable of understanding and can maybe speak a basic word at a time. Like 3 is the base. 3 is the base for speech. So formulate words, understand when you say water, you know what you're saying.
Okay, so 3 is the base.
Yes.
Okay.
So you understand when someone says water, you know what water means. You can say water to indicate you're thirsty. You may not necessarily be able to say, I am thirsty, please give me some water.
Right.
But you might be able to get out thirsty, water, dry, so anything beyond 3, right? But again, thinking of concentration, you could justify that concentration, like holding a thought and a complex thought at that, could require more than the base needed of speech. So let's say, to be very generous, 6.
Okay.
So I want to get a good minimum that we're all comfortable with. Chat, chime in. Do you think 6 is generous enough to say 6 would be a bare minimum to consider the creature intelligent enough to hold concentration? Then what I want to get to is I need to get over to D&D Beyond real quick. That's interesting idea. There we are, monsters. Okay, so what I'm trying to look for is I want to go to...
I like how in D&D Beyond you can search by different like category types.
I just can't search by intelligence, no. But
oh, really? Oh, yeah,
let's
that's
do
unfortunate.
just a max of 4. I'm just really curious. So let's say... What's a basic undead? I'm trying to think of like, what's a basic undead?
Skeleton? Or a zombie?
Skeleton, zombie... ash, zombie. Okay, skeleton. Perfect. Intelligence of 6.
Okay.
So what I was getting at, long-winded way of getting here, is if we say that intelligence has a minimum requirement, we'll call it 6.
Okay.
And by default, we know that if a magical item casts it, it's the caster that has to maintain concentration. But what if you were able to justify a way to be able to pass off concentration? Like you can get a spell to go off, but something else can hold the concentration. Like it has to be a living being, something with concentration, something with intelligence.
So if I'm a necromancer,
something that could basically be interrupted, right? So, because we were talking about that,
Interesting.
like an inanimate object, originally this conversation was like an inanimate object can't hold concentration because how does it get interrupted, right? You basically are removing the need.
Right.
But what if instead of removing the need, you could pass on the responsibility? So then imagine that's where I was going with the undead part, is I was trying to think of like what sounds like a summonable dumb monster, but would have a bare minimum of intelligence to be able to say, hold us, because that would be super dangerous and OP, but it would be a very fascinating idea to be able to, like, let's say if you ritual cast a concentration spell, somebody else like in the ritual could hold the concentration after you've cast it or something. You know what I mean? Like, it would be a really unique twist on being able to, like, it would be a unique twist on the idea of like wizards banding together and like, you know, becoming stronger as a group.
What would you say if
What's going on, Hecate? Hecate
there
says
was
it's 8. Because it sounds.
what would you say if there was somebody concentrating on a spell and then somebody cast true polymorph on them and turned them into an object?
Oh, I believe so. Personally, my feeling on that, because I do believe that polymorph, you do keep your personal. No, just regular polymorph or true polymorph?
True polymorph.
Well, true polymorph, you take on the stats of the item, and I believe that if you end up being stuck in it, or if you're stuck in it the whole time.
If they maintain concentration the whole time, it's permanent.
Yeah, so I would say in those cases, no, because you're still, because for 2 reasons. Lore-wise, I consider that, especially from an old school, I don't know how many of you know this term, that haven't played in any of the older editions, but I would consider that definitely a system shock. Things like that are absolute same thing as an attack, right? Even if you defend against the attack, being attacked, you know, knocks you off. Being transformed knocks you off of your concentration, regardless of if it's.
So, like, it kills your concentration. It doesn't give you a save.
Well, I guess in 5th edition it would give you your save, but the point is it's basically like an attack. Something like that is jarring enough to me, and in the older editions it's called system shock.
Sure.
But basically, yes. However, that's the in-game version. Second reason why is because it does require a save. And in my opinion, a save, similar to being attacked, requires, like, it actually requires your effort, therefore it would take your concentration.
But what if they passed the save? What if they succeeded in the save?
The save itself is what knocks you off your concentration. Like, to me, if a spell comes on you, the idea that you saved out, that is what took your concentration. Like, it's jarring, you know something happened to you. Again, it's like being attacked and not being hit.
What I mean is, like, so, okay.
Or I guess being attacked and not being hit, if they don't hit your AC, you don't lose concentration. It's only if you're actually struck, huh?
It's only if it's only if you take damage that you're forced to make the saving throw. But if you pass the save, then you keep your concentration.
So then I would say that in that particular case, anything that happens to you, if you save out of that, you still have to then save for your concentration. Like, so there wouldn't be an automatic knockout of your concentration. But like with polymorph.
But if you, so my ultimate question is, if you were to succeed out of this save and become an object, would you be able to still have concentration?
I don't think so, because that particular case, I don't think you'd have the intelligence anymore.
So then there would be no point in for you to save, because no matter what is, you're not going to be able to hold concentration when you become the object.
Because you can't save out of the polymorph.
I mean, you can. So when somebody casts true polymorph on you and you're an unwilling participant, I have a chance to save.
So that's what I'm saying is, like, so let's say it casts on you.
Okay.
So first thing you have to do is save against polymorph.
Save against polymorph, and I fail.
No matter what, pass or fail, you now have to save against concentration.
Okay.
That's what I was getting to. That's my point.
And that's fine.
But if you lose polymorph,
if I lose polymorph and become the object,
then essentially there is no concentration check because you've killed your concentration. So in that rare
so I've
instance,
killed the concentration. So because that's what my idea is it's like, okay, if somebody's holding concentration, or theoretically, basically, I'm trying to get an object to have concentration.
I think that wouldn't be the way to go about it. And I think that would interrupt the individual's ability to concentrate.
So another question, and I know this might be getting slightly off topic, but
when don't we? I rolled a 1 already. Like,
I know.
Chat was in on this.
Fine.
They knew. You knew what you were getting into.
But if someone were to cast true polymorph, and turn someone or something, turn a creature into an object, like, I'm curious if that object would still. I know there's a way. I
don't think that's the way to do it. I don't think true polymorph is the way to go.
I'll come back to it.
Ooh, Hecate, good idea. What if on the same alternative rule, right? Like we're talking about passing off concentration, all of this other stuff. What's the minimum concentrate? What's the minimum intelligence? So if we're talking about minimum intelligence to hold concentration, Hecate has a good idea. What if you had maxed out intelligence? Should that justify multiple concentration? Like if you had if you actually had 20 intelligence, would you be able to justify a player being allowed to have 2 concentration spells?
I like that idea. I very much like that idea. I think
terrible.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I mean, especially with how difficult it can be to get a 20. If you were able to do it, I mean, other people try to get as max out on, dexterity and stuff. So, I mean, if it is possible, if you work on it, I would say that that's not so game breaking that if you've gotten a 20, I think you kind of deserve something that's game bending. I would call that game bending, not game breaking, but I wouldn't give it out in any other circumstance. But if you earned it like that, that's a pretty substantial earn, I think. That's like basically telling telling a fighter, if you could max out strength, I'll give you like a third attack each round, or a second action surge, right, an additional one, like being able to basically give anybody anything. You can you're able to max it out.
You like the idea of being able to roll under, right?
Yeah, that's my preferred.
So I'm thinking in my head as you're talking, like imagine being able to attempt to cast a second concentration spell, and you roll a d20, and if you roll under your level, then you succeed.
Oh, okay. So, well,
at level 1, it's not going to happen.
Right. So it gets easier the higher the level you get.
Yes.
Interesting. I would definitely still lock it up to a level. You can't start doing it until a certain level then. Like you wouldn't be able to start doing that until level 10 at minimum.
Interesting.
But then you could start doing that because I don't know though, because you're talking about like at level 2, and then at level 2 you crit fail in order to do it. If you say you have to go under your level. So really you can't even attempt to do it until level 3. And if you crit fail, if you have a backlash, if you had an actual substantial backlash,
either like the spell backfires or something happens with the other concentration spell that you already have up,
or spells go off and it backfires on you. But the idea behind that would make it not worthy to even attempt,
unless you're pretty sure that it's. I mean, like it's a thought. It's a thought because
interesting.
I like the idea of being able to try that kind of stuff, to being able to like again think outside the box in a lot of situations. Yeah.
I definitely like the idea that if you've earned the max, I'm definitely okay with a custom sort of upgrade like that. Whether it's depending on what your class is, I can definitely get behind some sort of custom upgrade if you've earned that level of like max out.
Now that I'm thinking about it, when we're talking about creatures, would you say that there's a certain level of intelligence required to have what you would call a soul? It's like you can like pledge your soul to somebody, you can make a deal for your soul.
There's no minimum intelligence for an actual spirit or a soul.
If somebody's turned into an object, does their soul stay within that, theoretically?
So in that particular case, if we're talking about like, so you're talking about specifically true polymorph.
Yes.
Right? If you were to have that happen to you.
Because theoretically, I'm thinking, what if 10 years down the line, somebody comes back and casts True Polymorph on you again to turn you back into who you were? Would it work? Would your soul still be there?
I don't know can you be that specific? You can't turn things into specific things, though. Like, you couldn't turn one person into another person. Like, you can't clone someone.
No, but so, I could. But that's the thing is,
you can't really undo it.
But that's my question is, if that's what they were anyways.
No, it wouldn't work. See, it wouldn't undo it. That would be DM specific level like trickery, where if that happens, they go back to their natural form. But
That would be my question, is because like their soul is theoretically still in there, and so like that's their kind of like their fingerprint.
So
like I can
here's the reason why I'm like
that.
Here's the reason why I'm struggling with this, and the more I think about it, I think I already know the answer. It's just taking me a minute to like. I've never been presented with this in terms of like a game mechanic in for High Point, right? Like I've done this on a like immortal and godlike scale of having them turn people into just things, but the idea of a wizard turning someone else into an object, like it's been threatened, and maybe I have it like there's an evil wizard that's done that to his people, but like it never really went beyond that. So here's what I'm thinking, right? Is the moment the spell becomes permanent. So let's say it lasted an hour and it's now absolute permanent. I would say what I would have to rule is one of two things is going to happen. Because you could have the idea that the soul's there, and there's a lot of different paths you can take with something having a soul, or you could just say that they expire. So my thinking is that it's going to depend on what you turn them into, and I would assume that the higher level you are, the more valuable an item you could turn them into, right? So if you wanted to turn them into a chair at a low level, or I guess True Polymorph is just one spell, right? So I don't know how intricate you can get with what you can turn them into, right? But what I would assume you would have to do is if you polymorph them into any mundane item, I would say if you want to be nice about it, maybe there's a 24-hour, but you can't undo True Polymorph, right? It can't be undone. Once it's permanent, it can't be dispelled. I think once it's permanent, it's permanent.
Spell shape changers.
I don't think you can dispel.
Transforms. Oh, it says if you concentrate in the spell for the full duration, the transformation lasts until it's dispelled.
Oh, so if that's the case, then it's a suspended animation. Then yeah, they keep their soul.
Okay.
If it were, so basically where I was going with this is in that particular case, you're basically in suspended animation. For all you know, it's a blink of an eye.
Okay, that's what I would, because I think that
once dispelled, you're just back to normal.
It actually says that you don't remember any time while you were in that
exactly
form.
how I would rule it. So where I was going is if this were a true permanency, you're just that object, there is no dispel. I was going to rule it that what would have to be done is you have to look at what's the quality of the object. If you were a mundane object, your character's done. You are now a mundane object. You cease to be. Your soul will probably end up going into the afterlife, but your physical form ceases to be, right? Because that kind of magic doesn't affect your soul, right? Mortal magic doesn't alter the soul. Gods would never allow that. That's actually one of the reasons why, at least in High Point, there was the war of magic and the war of power, because mortals could affect the soul, and gods were like, wait a second, that's my shit right there. And, I mean, mortals were doing so much that they were able to rip souls out of their afterlife. So imagine that was like to a god, that was like reaching into their Bitcoin wallet and just being like, yoink.
Yeah.
So what did they do? They locked down the Bitcoin and it's like, no, it's encrypted. None of you can fucking touch it. You don't know what it looks like. You don't know how to use it. All you like, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of what ended up happening was they were dipping into power they shouldn't have. So I would look at it as if the spell truly transformed you into something, say mundane, you're gone. Your soul goes to wherever it needs to go to after the fact. However,
would it be so powerful though?
Basically, power word kill. It's just instant death. But again, in High Point, death isn't the end. But my other thing was, let's say you have a clever enough, mage. Maybe you add it in where if you have extra materials, you can use that as part of the polymorph. I don't know how you want to rule it, but if you turn them into, say, something ornate, like a bejeweled dagger, that actually is worth something. Well, now that thing is now valuable. Valuable things can be magical, and magical things can be intelligent. And you may have inadvertently created a magical item, or I might rule it as you've turned into this bejeweled dagger, and over time, you may become sentient once again as yourself, but now you are a sentient dagger.
There's very few restrictions on what you can turn them into. The only thing it really says is it can be no larger than the creature's size.
Yeah. So again, if you turn them, that means no complexity. So again, that's where I was going is if it were to be permanent, if you turn them into mundane, it's a mundane item. But if you turned it into something that could essentially be a magical item, you know, hold magic, you could basically say that their soul would then be trapped in it because they still have a vessel. Because that's my thinking, right? When you're talking about souls in D&D, it's all about the vessel. If it goes into something that can't hold the vessel, then it goes away. But if it turns into something that can technically hold it, it didn't lose its vessel. And that's how one way you could explain how you have sentient weapons. But if it can be dispelled, I would say if it can be dispelled, then it's going to be suspended animation, which I think you said is what it does.
Yeah.
But it would be really interesting is to have someone who says they want to modify it, because I have that in High Point where you can modify spells. Imagine someone that modified it that took away the coma.
Oh, that made sure that they were aware?
Imagine that. Imagine true polymorph, but you just made them aware of the passage of time. That's all you changed.
That would be torture. That would be, just imagine being me like, hey, I want you to tell me something. And if you don't, I'm going to turn you into a chair.
Can you imagine? Oh, dude. Can you imagine like the BBEG turning like their nemesis into their mirror?
Like, wild.
Imagine this like bulking, huge, like 8-foot tall paladin, you know, and then and he gets this off and he turns into this elaborate mirror. And so
now,
every day he gets to look in the mirror.
That's a question for you.
Oh,
that's
would be
to me would be dangerous because mirrors themselves hold a lot of significance.
There's a lot there, but I was just thinking of the visual of, can you imagine the body length mirror every day? You're just looking into it like, don't I look good? Time to go rule. And then you walk away, but you realize like inside, like the prior king.
Yeah.
And that's like his evil brother or something. And it's like every day you're just looking into it being like, I got you. Oh, that would be, but like, that would be torture. That would be, you had it right. That would be absolute torture. Aki says, love the glasses, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I had to, my eyes have been killing me lately.
Oh yeah, plot twist, BBEG's weapon. Oh, not just the weapon being a polymorphed person. Can you imagine like the BBEG, that's just their shtick? Is the lore is that anybody who goes up against him is never seen again. That's the lore behind him. That's their whole deal. So when you fight them, they're just a normal BBEG, but what you find out is they have this, so you find out the lore is everything. Their armor, their weapons, their throne.
Bro, I just imagine them having this sick robe and it just keep getting more and more like little medals on it or like jewels or something. And he, like, there was this one, that one Transformers really movie cool who like would take trophies from all the different Transformers that he would kill, the Autobots or whatever.
I really like this idea of a BBEG that just everything they have, everything they own. If you're in their throne room, it's the throne.
Hold on, what level is it?
It's the mirror. It's their robe.
It is 9th level. It is 9th level.
It's their necklace. Everything around them was another warrior that went after them. And imagine the taunting you could get from that battle where it's like, you'll look good there. You'll look good above the mantle. He gives everyone nicknames in the fight to tell them what they're going to turn into. Oh, can you imagine the psychologicalness, like the torture of that? The psychological torture of telling them what they're going to be. Like, you're a fiery one, you'll go good as a cauldron.
So, okay, real quick, I'm reading this spell and I am curious. It says you can turn a creature into a creature. You can turn an object into a creature, which is weird because if it becomes permanent, then does that creature get a soul?
It only has like a 1 or 2 intelligence, so it was like an animated. I would just say it's a bare minimum animated object. Like a permanent animated object.
No, this is like you're turning it into like, I'll turn like a chair into a tiger.
Yeah, so it's like 1 or 2 intelligence. It's very basic, but again, it can still be dispelled. So it's a complex animated object.
And then you can turn a creature into an object.
Yeah,
but you can't turn an object into another object. That's the only one you can't do.
Wonder why. I mean, it's probably for like the purposes because it does say object size. So it's like, how big are we talking? Like, you know, can I turn a whole building or a pyramid or like what?
But you know, I would say the same thing should be true of object to creature. Because could I turn a pyramid into a Tarrasque? right? If it's big enough, if it fits the size category or whatever, you know.
I wonder what the limitations of that spell are meant to be.
It says you can turn an object into any kind of creature as long as the creature's size is no larger than the object's size.
So if you found an object equal in size to a Tarask, I mean, why wouldn't you be able to do that?
Creature is friendly to you and your companions at X on your turn. That's freaking wild.
Just got it. I'm curious. This guy, I mean, I would definitely put limitations, right? Like, there's just got to be like.
Oh, so his challenge rating is 9 or lower.
Okay, see.
There we go.
See, there's always something that holds it back. Because I was gonna say, like,
bless America.
Man, mass cast a spell, turn the entire battle. Oh my god! Not only would that turn the entire battle in your favor because you've stripped them of everything, but you've also like multiplied the offensive against him because now it's one guy versus 50. And now he's disarmed and has no armor.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be hilarious, but that would be I don't know, can you mass cast that? Is mass cast like just something that you can do on?
No, like there are certain
magic?
Not in 5th edition. Like there is, I mean, you have twin spell with meta magic. That's the closest you're gonna get. So you could cast it multiple times.
Can you imagine like a 9th level ritual that is like takes an hour to do, but can mass cast any spell? Like, you know, up to a certain amount. Like, I don't know how useful that would be, but like role, you know, in combat, not at all. But like role play wise, I'm curious, like, can you like mass resurrect or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, there could be a lot of
interesting.
Really, you know, because I mean, think about the BBG lead up to that. Like, you have one day to get to him, and he's going to do this hour-long ritual, and you have like basically an hour long to get through all of his minions, so you could actually have like an in-game timed battle.
Yeah, and depending on how many like
because you have to interrupt him. All you have to do is interrupt him. So whatever you can do, but you start the battle far enough away to where you can't like range attack him.
Yeah.
So you have to like work and oh, that would be really a fascinating like either end game or just a one shot, just a in-game timed battle where you have 1 hour. You get there right at the nick of time where he starts the ritual, and you have 1 hour before he finishes.
You'd have to do something to nerf teleportation spells, because somebody's just gonna get like somebody.
Well, that's on the DM to plan out.
Yeah,
right? Like,
exactly.
Obviously, it would trigger stuff, but it would be really interesting to see, like, to map it out and be like, okay, it's this far away, so it would only take, you know, so long to actually get there, and then you put in enough encounters where, you know, you try to time it out to where if each encounter went their maximum length, they'd have basically just enough time. So only if they really fuck up do they not make it. And then you just have them kind of have that struggle of every round counts, literally and figuratively.
That would be crazy. That would be so crazy.
I might make this. There might be something like this when we finally get the tavern done. I might run something like that, just as kind of like maybe
a fun little.
Just maybe we'll record that.
Very nice.
Because
very
that
nice.
sounds really fun. It sounds like almost like an arena or a tournament style, but a little bit more like everything's on the line. You know. Oh, the problem with that though. See, this is the problem with like. Didn't even think about that. This is the real problem with D&D hit points. Is a 2-minute combat. Which, let's face it, who actually goes 2 minutes in-game combat, right? Like,
I've never
30-second combat. Right?
Yeah, I was about to say, I've never seen a combat last more than a minute.
And in reality, it's like, yes, it's a fight to your death, but I guess in reality, when you're thinking about the reality of like real fighters, right? Like, think about boxing, think about MMA, think about, you know, any major extreme sports. These aren't 30 seconds of, I mean, even the 100-meter dash isn't 30 seconds, right? Like there's, well, I guess that one's, yeah, there are definitely ones that are under 30 seconds, but I'm just trying to think of like a lot of the things that we look at in terms of like physical exertion. Yes, we've talked about this in an extent of hit points is a lot about your ability to stay alive, you know, in a moment, right? Like you were going to fight to the death.
Right.
And yes, those fights can happen in a flash, but that's another thing we haven't really talked about is like combat is always in the flash combat, right? And like there really isn't combat that takes a long time in what we would call a long time, right?
Yeah.
There's not a minute or two long combats, which there can actually be a minute long fight.
Very much so. Very much so.
And that idea of, you know, you've seen those like, you know, like you see it in movies, TV, right? Where they're, you have to fight to get to the bad guy, right? Like something's happening and they have to fight through all the minions. That's not 10 seconds. That's not 30 seconds, right? That's a couple minutes of getting there. They're all worn out and everything, but then you get that second wind and then you're all at it, right? But you wouldn't be able to actually do that in D&D. You wouldn't be able to do anything officially in game that lasted longer than 10 minutes without a rest. Like you'd literally die. D&D almost makes it seem like your characters are, I mean, anything that's, because like multiple combats, right? If you had multiple combats back to back, if you wanted to plan out a 10-minute session where they were going to have 10 minutes in game worth of combat, they would literally die. Because D&D, by that case, they would have exerted themselves tenfold by like the third fight.
Yeah.
Because no HP loss or like no HP regains, exhaustion would be hitting a lot of them, spell slots would, think about this, like mages can literally only be useful like outside of combat because they're really useful in combat. But if you think about it in lore wise, mages are about only as good for maybe like 15 seconds. Like in all of, like if you really break it down of everything they do, like unless there's like they last long, like it's kind of funny. Like if you really break down how quick combat is, like in-game time, and how quick each round is, and if you only get like 3 spells off, you're literally doing something quote unquote as a mage for like a total of maybe 15 seconds in an entire game. But then again, everybody is, right? Because you're,
yeah, but still,
it's just, when you kind of take a step back and realize like combat might be the most broken thing in D&D, and I don't mean like everything has to be real, but combat may be the most like skewed. I shouldn't say the most broken. Combat is probably the most skewed thing in all of D&D, right? We have great lore and great understanding about how magic works, about how like diplomacy and role play. We have all of these things figured out, but if you really try to look at how combat functions in D&D, it's kind of just broken and weird. It's always fast. It's like literally always lightning fast, but at the same time, it's slow as shit. It's always,
yes,
it's always essentially, hopefully it's always min-max in a good way, right? Like you're always like doing the absolute best thing you can in every combat. But there are no, I don't really feel like there's any like slog battles where you're winning, but it's just taking a long time. You know what I mean? Like, you don't really get like the wave combat of like minions as often. I've seen it happen once in a while, but you don't get it very often. But yeah, really trying to apply like the concept of battle. And it's like, if you think about what's a short rest, an hour?
Oh, yes.
And then a long rest is 8 hours.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, there's really no way for you to do any extended amount of combat. And even if you think about like in an arena fight, right? You're getting to fight for like 1 minute and then you have to go away for an hour. Like, I'm pretty sure in an arenas, fighters are going back to back. Even in boxing, like think about boxing. You get 10 seconds to rest
between those rounds. Yeah,
and then you're going back, and those rounds are lasting longer than a D&D combat is. And there's way more fists being thrown.
Like 5 minutes sometimes?
And there's way more punches being thrown, but sometimes not. Sometimes they're just dancing around. So I know that again,
we
it's
got to hydrate from Lucifer.
We got hydrate, but you know what I'm saying?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I actually think combat is maybe the worst thing about D&D in terms of representation. Again, not necessarily like it's wrong. It's just, it may be the most like skewed aspect of all of the things that happen, because it really doesn't make a lot of sense if you put any objective lens on it.
I very much agree. I'll say that I think that they tried to simplify it as much as possible so that, it was easy to, it's just very bite-sized. It's just very, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but just very repeatable. But I very much agree that like, even so recently I started watching on what is it, Amazon, they have like Vox Machina, which is like they actually had these combats in D&D and now they've animated them. Right? And so I'm like watching what the animation looks like, and I'm trying to like in my mind envision, how did this actually play out in game? how did this actually realistically play? Like, did it look like this? Like, did these pauses happen? Did these moments happen? Did these moments where the dragon's talking to them mid combat? Like,
I think so.
You know,
and they do stuff like that, right?
They very much do. But like, it's like how, like when you're looking at like how this is actually taking place, because again, a lot of those combats look and feel and realistically in the show take longer than a minute to happen, right? And so like when you're watching all this stuff happening, like in the game, how much time calculated would have passed for
like
all those
turns, rounds,
for all of those things to happen, right? And so I'm just interested to like see realistically like what that would have looked like if D&D had actually, if they had animated it the way D&D says it should have been animated. Right. But with the rules as written, like each one of these took exactly 6 seconds. Let me animate.
Or even without like the turn-based part, just show the overlap. Show everyone acting within 6 seconds, but it's all the same 6 seconds. So you can show everyone doing it in whatever order, but you show the back, like show everyone doing their actions close up and then zoom out and then showing them all at once, right? Because again, that's the other thing that D&D doesn't like. There's like the small metagame you can't get around, right? When like an enemy runs up on you and then it's my turn. So then I'm like, well, I see him run up on him, so I do this. There's a little bit of metagame because you didn't technically see him run up on your enemy. You would have been acting whatever you were about to do at the same time that enemy started running forward. So technically you would have been mid-action.
I will say,
and then been able to change
there's
action.
A lot of anticipation for stuff that happens. And realistically, imagine if I used my entire speed one turn and my entire speed the next turn. What realistically did I stop in between? Did I stop and like hold my position?
Exactly.
Or am I continually moving?
You're in
Same thing for the enemy.
But a lot of the times is like people will act like they are stopped. They are
exactly.
And this is where like I've tried to work on different mechanical ways to bring this into the game. The problem is it always comes down to something gets overly complicated. But I've thought about things like preemptive, right? Where it's like, okay, everybody, I mean, it takes a lot of, trust in your DM to know that they have the honor system, but I've tried things like where all the players basically have to like give a brief on what their action is. Like, hey, I'm going to attack this enemy. Hey, I'm going to be moving and then I'm attacking. Hey, I'm doing this spell. So then when the round starts and everyone goes through their initiative, if an enemy does something and someone changes their mind, you would basically have but your character would already have been in your action. Think about again. You have turns, but your initiative isn't you doing an entire 6 seconds of action and then the next person does. Within that 6 seconds of the entire turn, that's the order that you begin moving in, right? If you ran and then I ran, technically we ran together in the 6 seconds. But if you were to watch it in slow-mo, you picked up first, right? Like you shot off the rail first, right? That's how I look at it. That's how initiative really is if you and I both run, even if you were first in initiative, I'm last. At the end, it looks like we just ran together. But if you slow-mo, you took a step first.
Sure.
Because I'm at the end of initiative, we ran together, but the further back in initiative, the more you've technically already gotten ahead. So,
but I will say something to the effect of it's like if I start running and like during that 6 seconds an explosion happens, theoretically,
and then
like
you would react to it.
I have the ability to respond to that and be like, oh my gosh, this happened. Like I'm gonna do this now.
And that's where I was trying to look at like giving people reactionary points. Like once you've stated your action, as we go through initiative, if you have these reactionary points available, you can deviate from your previously done plan. Like if your buddy gets shot, or if he's about to, you can deviate and jump in front of it. Something like that.
Sure,
but it gets complicated at that point, because then everybody has to have two actions, right? The bullet point action, but then their description, and then they have to have these so that got too complicated. But that's the problem, right? Is yes, you can, but that's not technically what players are doing. They are waiting for an entire thing to happen and then make a decision, instead of I'm in the middle of something and there's something that happened enough to get my attention. Like
yes,
but there's no way to solve that without getting complicated. I've literally tried, like I've ran this in multiple ways. I've tried. I think that was the cleanest way I was able to do it. Is preemptive. Just give me, are you attacking, moving, casting a spell? Give me the action you're doing first. Then I'm going to run through the initiative so it all happens. And then if you wanted to react to something and it was justifiable, or if you had the reactionary point, you could change or deviate. And that's kind of what also led to the idea behind, I also tried like converting from, I think we talked about this before, the game Colt Express, the board game. It's a really interesting like Western board game where you have like this 3D train. You actually have like this model train, and all of your characters are like on the train. You're robbers. You're trying to rob it before it gets to its stop, right? And every round has like different conditions, right? But what's really interesting about gameplay is it's a card-based game. Your cards are your actions, and everybody will, instead of going in turns, right? Instead of everybody like doing their action and the next person acting, it will go around, and let's say you're first. You'll put a card down, but you'll put it face down. And the next person will put their action face down on top of yours, and it will go around the table. And then who's ever in control, like the narrator, will pick up all the cards, flip them over, and then they will narrate from there what happens throughout the rest of the round.
I think we did talk about this. I do remember that.
And I really kind of like this concept because everyone gets to choose what they're going to do, but it's not based on what you've seen already happen because everyone's acting simultaneously. So it's one of those, if you say I'm running this way and someone says I'm running that way, well, it doesn't matter because you both chose that. So you would just start running. You wouldn't wait for the other to react, right? So I even thought about how would you do that in D&D, where it's like, how would you be able to have everybody say what they were going to do or write down, you know what I mean? Like that gets complicated. How you write down what you want to do. So it's like, I really do think that there is room to grow with this, like this idea to help people understand what combat's actually doing. And I think there's a way to expand how combat works. Because and maybe it's a little bit too much. I think we did. I mentioned how like I'm not a huge fan of like the modifiers and how it scales and everything.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the problem. Maybe the scaling is how HP, AC, and damage all scale together. Because realistically, maybe the problem is we do too much damage with people who have too little life. So it's not just one or the other, right? You don't just want to knock down all damage, but you also don't want to just give everyone 500 hit points. But there's got to be a way to where we have to realize that why can't you do 3 combats in a row without a rest? Like, does it really make sense? Because again, if combat was longer, if combat was really 10 rounds, like a whole ass minute, right? Or 10 minutes. Like if you could now granted, here's the problem with that, right? How do you justify doing 100 turns in a fucking combat, like in game without it being extremely boring?
Right.
Because combats are already long. How do you make them longer, but still engaging? But again, it's very convoluted and it's a very weird issue. And I think combat doesn't make sense.
That's why I feel like over the editions, I really feel that they have kind of made a lot, because even theoretically throughout the editions, combat hasn't changed a whole lot. Like the turn structure, like yes, they had turns and segments and like different sections of turns that did different things and they played around with it, but for the most part, it's been the same unrealistic mindset of combat throughout. And so I think that again, when people talk about going to Pathfinder or whatever other RPGs that are out there, like each and every one found a system that they tried out that could or didn't work for them, and a lot of them, the initiative system, like how else are you gonna do it? I mean, you can't just have everybody like yelling at the same time, everybody like going off doing their own thing. And so like there's got to be some sort of order to it, and I think that's just while it is challenging, but
again, it's like, how do you do it without making it feel just boring and a slog? Like, you don't want to make it so realistic it's boring, but you also, I do feel like right now it's not really in a good sweet spot, right? I feel like it's in a weird place where we're all used to it, but I don't know if it's the best. I agree. I feel like a lot of people are comfortable with it because, like you said, they're used to it. I would qualify it as usable, right? I think you hit it earlier though on the head with Vox Machina. I think we need to get back into more role play during combat. I think that could help a lot. Like, I think just the idea, not just playing out what you're doing, but making, like, I try to make the little things matter. Like in combat, it's not just about the roll, but what you do with that roll matters to me, right? You know, it's not just whether you hit their AC, but what move you do, in my opinion, will adjust what move they do. And I think there's a sweet spot in trying to blend it between not making every last action homebrew and customized, right? Like your attack roll is still your attack roll. So you don't want to make it to where you can change every attack roll and get modifiers if you just say it in a nice way, right? So you don't want to be at that extreme. But I also don't like the other extreme where we get the term that I absolutely despise, but flavor text. When people get to that point where no matter what they say, it's zero benefit. Like, it doesn't change the story, it doesn't enrich the story. It's just, yeah, if you want to think that, you can, right? And that's where it's like, I think there's a blend in between where, yes, your dice roll matters, but what you said also matters. So while you may not, you know, have hit them, while the description of what you did may not have accomplished anything through the dice roll, in the situation, maybe you can get an outcome. Like, maybe you do a flurry move, maybe you try to be fancy and you miss them, but maybe I take that as, yeah, you did miss them, but now they're confused and I'm going to give them disadvantage on their next shot because it's literally their turn next. Like let's say the situation is, it is their turn in initiative next, and you did this flurry confusing thing and try to get behind them and hit them and miss them. But guess what? It's immediately their turn. So while you're doing that flurry, what were they doing? Actively attacking you. You did a flurry and ended up behind them. So they're going to have a disadvantage on hitting you.
Or a lot of the times, like, say you rolled high enough, but you just barely missed their AC. A lot of the times, like, especially if your dexterity is a part of your AC, that's usually because you're dodging it, or because maybe you're a martial artist and maybe you're blocking it. So maybe they're sitting there, like, engaged with you during this turn, and they're, like, focused on you. So now, if they want to attack somebody else, or they want to do something to somebody else other than you, they're engaged with you, so that'd be at a disadvantage to attack those people. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, you could do that too. Yeah.
You know.
So that's how I try to engage more with combat, is because that to me, like, it's that perfect gap of, you're not going to be able to alter every single move, right? A basic attack is still a basic attack. You don't want it to be where you can always get bonuses, because then why not just give them the bonuses, right? But I don't want them to feel like they can make this cool descriptor and the dice roll just makes it useless. Like, I want those things to matter. The dice roll is just the infliction of whether or not it's going to take away their ability to stay in combat. That's the only thing the dice roll is about, right? The first dice roll is about whether it's going to affect their ability to stay in combat. The damage roll is how much. Those are the two dice rolls, and that's how I look at them mechanically. But that is not the only thing, right? We've talked about this. Missing is not whiffing. Missing AC does not mean you missed the target.
Very much so.
You just didn't inflict fatigue. You didn't do anything to take them out of battle. And again, this could be mental, physical, emotional damage. In battle, you're constantly dealing with your just whole, the whole thing is you wanting to stay in the battle, right? Everything that happens to you. Which is why there's part of me that kind of wants, like, really bad misses to take away HP, in the sense of morality, or not morality, but moral.
Oh, like, like morale.
Morale. Thank you. Not moral. Morale. The idea behind, like, let's say if you miss 3 times in a row, you have to take 5 points of HP. Not because you got hurt, but because you've literally missed, that in your mind, you're like, am I going to survive? Like, there's doubt. Like, why can't HP be doubt? Why can't you have an action surge or a health? Like, you know how you have second wind on fighters? Why can't people, if someone gives a rallying speech in combat, why can't you give everybody 10 plus temp HP? Not because they're suddenly healed, but because inside of them, they're like, we're not going to lose today.
See, I almost like the idea of, for something like that, just giving them like a -1 or a -2 for the next, like, turn or so on any attack rolls. But again, because it messes, like you said, it messes with their confidence. It messes with their ability to feel like they're going to be successful in the future. And I can tell you, just as a martial artist, like, one of the biggest things we tell people when they're moving forward to, like, break a board or do anything like that is, whether you believe you're going to fail or whether you believe you're going to succeed, you're right.
Exactly.
Right? That attitude that you approach it with, if you're like, It's gonna hurt.
That's what like when I've talked about how when I set up combat and encounters, I look at things like what is the alignment, what's the morale, what is the agenda of the the enemy, the encounter. Right. I always try to look, I always try to like get those ideas in mind, right? Because to me, I like having those things affect combat, right? If it's a group and the morale is already low, taking out the leader, they're all going to scatter, right? If the morale is really high and they have an objective and that's what they're here to do, they're less likely to back out.
Right.
But if they're just a group that I just kind of threw in here and it starts to turn into the situation where they're like, we're in over our heads and we didn't want this, I'll let them fucking try to run. You know what I mean? Like I like having that
very much
dynamic, right? And so when I have players, who just, again, there's the kind of player just like, okay, I attack them, I swing my sword, right? That's fine. You can do that and we'll just play that way. But if you're going to do something, I'm going to take that into account. I mean, if you're doing, now granted, I'm not just going to give bonuses just because you're doing it. But if you're doing something to where it is, you're trying to intimidate them during an attack, right? Just because you missed doesn't mean it still wasn't intimidating.
Right.
Doesn't mean that that's not going to, you may not see the effect, but I'm taking stock of that effect.
Like, because I like the idea of, even as a player, like articulating, hey, I want this to be like the scariest, creepiest, and like even if I miss, like almost intentionally, like I could play it off as like a warning shot or something like that. Oh, yeah. Like just something like this, just like coming at the whole thing is just like, I want this to be, because again, it feels so bad when it's like, yo, I'm here, I got an advantage, I got all these things, and you still freaking miss, and it feels like the whole thing falls flat. But it's like, I very much agree with that.
It's like you shouldn't remove the effort. Like, right? It's like it's basically saying you're punishing their effort because of the dice roll, and you're telling them your effort wouldn't have mattered. It's the dice roll. And so I like to find that like middle ground where the dice roll still matters for its intended purpose, which is, do you inflict fatigue, right? That's all HP is your ability to stay in combat. Right. That's what the dice roll is. But everything else that you did to get under their skin, to get in their head, if you did something really cool and went behind them, why is it just default that they're going to do this? They're not going to, you know what I mean? Like, if you're a good enough fighter, you're going to get there quick. And again, if 6 seconds is happening for everyone, and at the end of your turn, you end up behind them, I'm just going to say, well, he naturally follows you around, so nothing happens. Right? Like that. No, he's going to have a difficulty following you, especially if you did a cool move. Even if you missed, you still pulled it off, right? Now, if you crit failed, you might have to do a dex check to not fall on your ass for getting behind him, or maybe he gets an opportunity attack because, there are ways that we can like justify,
which is why it's a scale of like how bad you failed or things like that.
And imagine that kind of thing, right? Opportunity attacks are usually if you leave their area of combat, but if you technically stay in their thing and move around them, there's no opportunity attack. But if you crit failed, I'd totally be like, there's a chance that you left an opening. That's the idea, right? That's that kind of dynamic combat I like, because what it tells me is, and it gives me like other things to work with. If you try to do an attack, but you've affected the environment somehow, I'm now going to take that into account, that the environment has been affected, right? Like that's one thing. Again, I don't want to say that DMs don't do it. I don't think anybody really tries to utilize environments in combat as much. Like the idea of tables, chairs. I mean, part and partial. I know that when it comes to, for like me, like when it came to like Baldur's Gate, I know that was a huge thing that a lot of people loved, is everything can be used as a weapon. But unfortunately, in a game like that, for me, there was no incentive to do that, when more often than not, there was a more efficient or more powerful way to do it. Like, it's cute, it's funny, it's a meme, but it really had no actual benefit. Like picking up a pot and hitting it with someone for 5 HP. When I have a cantrip that does 15.
Right.
It's like I'm literally just making the game harder on myself.
I'm just wasting potential damage.
Because all it is, especially in Baldur's Gate, was literally you just hit him with an object. Whereas in D&D, if you do that, I'm going to roll to see if they got dust. Like, I'll make a roll for them to see, are they going to be distracted at all by that, right? It's not just that you hit them with an object and did the small, tiny 1d2 damage, but you smash it over their head. Are they make a constitution check? Are you dazed for a round? I mean, if you get hit by a
Like,
bottle in the head, you're going to take a second to get your wits about you.
You know how many times I've seen in movies like somebody like taking something, like throwing a pot like right at their face, them like easily blocking it, but then them using that block to like close the distance really fast and like what like doing something like that. Like there's no mechanic for getting that advantage.
That right there, if you said, I'm going to throw this at him and then I'm going to dash to get into his face and you miss, that would be the thing. Be like, okay, you throw it, as you dash, you see it explode, and right as you get to his face, you see his arm up, but he doesn't notice you. That would be the description. You missed, but because you tried to do the, I'm going to throw this at him to distract him, I'm going to say roll to hit.
Yo, imagine like a rogue uses that to hide. Like he dashes forward and he like uses that as like cover to like hide or something like that. Yo, that especially if he's going straight into like attack after that. Although that would be theoretically, I would find a way to make it work because that's too cool to not.
Yes.
Like,
but that's what I'm talking about is there's a lot of DMs I know that rule of cool would probably apply in some of these situations, but otherwise I know that, especially with like the discords that we've gamed in over the years, there's a lot of people who are just being like, okay, cool, you said that, but what is the role? Okay,
right.
This is, and even if you try to argue and be like, hey, you know, right here I described this, and because my character can do this, would I be able to pull this off on the other? Like, but if you would have made it, yes, but you didn't make it, you didn't hit the AC, so no. And it's like I've had DMs who like they've said like, you know, they'll be like, oh, you know, this is a really creative like server, and we're all here to like, you know, really like do a whole lot of stuff, and then you try to do something
in practice,
and it's really only them. They want to be creative. And all the players basically just have to be like, ooh, you're such a creative DM. But they don't really like acknowledge that the players are actually also trying to add into that, right? So, you know, there's different ways to add all of that up. It just, I guess it really depends on, you know, the flexibility of the DM's creativity.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mind taking into account all of those details, but I know that some people, it's easier to turn those things into a feat. So it's more structured and everybody knows every single time what's going to happen. And I don't mind that either, right? Custom feats, when a player does something really unique and being like, hey, in the future, you can just do that. Like, instead of having to redescribe it and all of that, let's just put a roll on that, and that's now something you can do.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of that when a DM really likes something that someone did, but isn't creative enough to feel comfortable, like allowing them to be super creative all the time and take over, but giving them the reward of like, okay, that's now something that you can do. That's just, I'm going to allow it, rule of cool, but in the future, that's now a thing that you can try. And we'll say if you ever roll this or higher, like a 16 or higher, you can pull it off. So I'm a big fan of that if you don't feel the whole confidence of being able to create anything up on the spot, right? If it's not that whole dynamic open world concept.
Right.
Soul says, I made one curse in all of the this is for the... Wait.
We had been talking about curses in chat for a little bit.
Oh, gotcha.
Because
so I'm late to that conversation.
No, that's all right.
Never mind.
Hecate is talking about one of his submissions. Another one of his in the monarch lineage. He's got a cursed monarch, and so he's in accompanying with that, he has curse spells that are going to be coming with that.
Okay.
And so we were talking about like what that'll look like, and that was Soul's contribution to it. So I'm excited to see what that is.
Always excited. New spells are always fun.
I love new spells.
Oh, all right. Where are we at? Already over an hour and off on topic that we didn't even have.
Do not know how we got that far off topic. We were talking about HP and turns in combat, and we're supposed to be talking about magic.
We're gonna have to update the title. That's all. We're just gonna have to just add more topics to the title. That's kind of what today was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be a loose conversation, and we just had a couple things to discuss straight ahead.
Made it work.
But I guess we can get to these other topics. I don't know, chat. Do you want us to get to the actual topics at hand, or do you guys just want to just have us keep on chatting about topics you want to hear about? We can do another chatting with chat if y'all have.
I mean, theoretically,
you guys want to talk about. Or should we get to the magic? Should we get to the concentration and the spells and the cantrips?
They were talking about magic in chat. I mean, granted, it was cursed magic, but still. Magic nonetheless.
I mean, if magic's been on the discussion board, then we can go over some magic. I feel we'll probably do a quick summary of the history of spellcasting, and then we can go into concentration and cantrips. Because we've already done several episodes on magic, so at least this way it'll be a little bit more of a summary of all of those, and then we can kind of get into the two other aspects.
Facts.
All right, so cantrips have had spellcasting. Spellcasting has had quite a roller coaster throughout all of the editions. We've gone over many of these. We've gone over bard specific, druid specific, ritual casting, meta magic, divine magic, and I think one or two other.
We've had a lot,
like magic based ones. So a lot of this is going to be a repeat of what we've ever done. Check out the YouTube channel if you guys want to see anything more specific. But going all the way back, we're just going to start with first edition. Technically, it's OD&D and AD&D, so before, prior first edition, and then with the accumulation.
Right.
So basically, they had the same thing. And as we mentioned before, this is back when they even still referred to it or knew it as the Vancian system. So quick summary on that: when D&D was first created, they were looking to do magic integration, wanted to figure out how they wanted to do magic, and there was a book series. I forget it off the top of my head right now.
I don't remember.
But it was, I have a note about it somewhere here. But basically in the book there was the description of how magic worked, which was by wizards memorizing them and being able to cast them, in the memory, the casting of it, basically used up what they had stored, and that was what was known as the Vancian system. And that's exactly what they ended up doing. The Vancian system from the author Jack Vance. He had a book series. I don't have the book series off the top of my head, but Jack Vance was the one that created the original book series. That's what they call it, the Vancian system. And that was your typical memorization. So at this point, first edition, you had to prepare all your spells in advance, and you essentially memorized them. You also had limited number of spells per day. So as you leveled up, you get more spells. So if you only had 3 spells, and then maybe you can only, maybe you knew 2 second level spells, right? So if you knew 3 and you knew second level spells, you can have any combination, but you'd have to memorize them first. So at the beginning of the day, you'd have your spell book, which is all the spells you know. And then you have to sit down and be like, I want
these are the ones I'm going to actually use. Yeah.
And that's it. You basically had your spell limits. You had your pre-decided, pre-memorized ideas. Once you cast it, it was forgotten. So it wasn't like you get cast that multiple times throughout the day. It was
that's the big one.
Yeah,
that's
it wasn't a recast.
Difference.
It was, so if you could cast 3 spells, you would memorize those 3 spells, and you can cast those 3. Once you cast the 1, it's gone. Now you only have 2.
So theoretically, if you wanted to cast the same spell twice, you would have to memorize the same spell twice.
Yes, exactly. And that's how you would do that. It's Dying Earth. That was the book series.
Dying Earth.
Jack Vance, Dying Earth.
Got it.
Was where they got this.
That does sound familiar.
Was where they got this magic from.
I'm gonna add that to the notes for this episode.
And that was where they got the idea of memorizing a spell and then having it vanish after being cast. And then of course you had spell components. So we still had verbal, somatical, material components. And that was just where a lot of the other limitations, the role play, would come into play. But then of course we've talked about this before. They gave the component belt and eventually, just the component bag. So at this point they were like, hey, if it's a standard spell, don't bother role playing for the materials, just have them. And then of course spell books were really important. Making sure that you had that to know your spells so you could memorize them. Because without your spell book, you had nothing to memorize.
Right.
And that was where the whole transcription of, if you were able to, you could find a book, write the spell into your notebook, if you could read it, and if you could learn it. And then once you learned it, put it in your spell book, then you would be able to have to memorize, blah, blah, blah. Let's see. It wasn't technically until first edition. So OD&D just had that. And even it basically worked the same for clerics. It wasn't until first edition where they expanded the idea that clerics would actually have it channeled through their divine. So still same concept where they pre-selected it and lost it, but it wasn't under the same ideology of memorization. So, but still same concept of,
you still had to do the same thing?
Yeah, your god still gave you 3 spells, And once you used one spell, you didn't have it the rest of that day.
Is that when they set it up to where those clerics would have access to their full spell list, whereas wizards still had to use their spell books?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And wizards had to find spells, learn spells. Clerics just had a spell list from their god that they could select from, and they would pray for the spell. The god would give it to them, and that's why they'd only have so many.
Got you.
Worked in parallel with spellcasters, but they did have a lot more of a variety. Second edition kind of expanded upon this, so you got a lot more spell lists, right? So we got better spells, better spell lists, and we also got specializations. So you also had things like, necromancy, evocation specialists, illusionary specialists, opened up different types of spells that you could do, and just allowed them to focus more instead of just be a generalized, here are the 10 spells everyone can cast. Now it was here's the 100 spells everyone can cast, and then here's 10 spells each of these types of people can cast. Wrong numbers, but you guys get the idea.
Right.
This is also where they better defined the division between divine magic, clerics, druids, and mages. So again, just leaning towards we still have the advancing system of memorization for wizards and mages. And then druids and clerics had a much more broad and open idea. They had a much bigger expanded spell list that they had full access to from the get-go, but still prepared all of their spells. So
Got you.
Still leaning in on that, but gave them more of you have a completely different spell list instead of a overlapping modified spell list, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah,
like they shared a lot of spells previously. Now you have much more of a cleric feel. Like, okay, clerics really do have their own magic.
You're independent.
And then there's also where they introduced a lot of the saving spells. So each like saving throw had their own categories. This is where you had like save versus spell, save versus death, save versus petrification.
Right.
So all of those kind of came all into the one. That was all for just complexity and balance. Just gives a lot different approach to magic, because before it was just you cast magic effect happens. Now you had the ability to fail casting magic. You had the ability for a lot more types of magic and magical effects and being able to save against them and just the different categories. So again, just much more expanded from first edition. And yeah, that's again really all second edition did was just expand upon it and kind of lean into it, I guess, more than first edition did.
Okay.
Let's see. So third edition, we get a little bit of a rule change here. So with third edition, they unified a lot more of the rules with spellcasting. Spell descriptions actually got a lot better. So this is where they really better defined some like vague spell rules and better classified groupings of spells, so they felt more consistent with each other.
That's fair.
You also got the concept of spell level remained the same, but unlike before, where spell level, like in the previous edition, second edition, and before, spell level was more indicative of power. Now in third edition, they've tweaked it to where there was now an actual progression. Like it wasn't just that spell seems more powerful. Now spell level actually felt like a progress. Like the spells you unlocked were unlocking more and more power, and they fed off of each other, right? Like so you had multiple versions of like invisibility, and those were properly spaced out to where it actually felt better for leveling up to when you would get them. So they just tried to better make the leveling process of spells. Instead of it just being level 5 just means powerful, now it actually meant like, no, I deserve to get level 3 and then level 4, and then when I get to level 5, that progression of the power, the progression of how the spells work, try to make a lot more sense out of it. Instead of it just kind of basically, it felt like more like they were trying to get away from how CR is, where spell level wasn't really indicative of anything other than I expect it to do a lot.
Right.
But now it was more of now I can actually judge what we're trying to do here and where I'm going to be with my power level. This is also where we got the introduction of sorcerers. So this is where the first concept, we had already clerics who could prepare their spells, but now we have sorcerers who didn't have to prepare any spells. They just got a spell list and basically had free access. So it was third edition who introduced us to this.
Okay.
And we also got the meta magic feats to go along with that. So the idea of modifying magic isn't new. We actually saw that in second edition, especially with Silence.
I remember that.
But having this as a formal aspect now for a class with the sorcerer was something that was a little bit new. This will come in handy later, but concentration became a much more important skill in third edition. This is kind of where it got its foundations as we know it, making what's going to be interesting, and what we'll talk about this right next, is that's what we're going to go over is concentration, is third edition brought what we call a concentration skill. So it wasn't just the concept of a concentration spell, but they actually gave you the ability to work on it and get better at concentration. So we'll go over that when we do the actual history of concentration here in just a second.
Okay.
But that's, I know we were talking about that a little bit before.
Yes, I do have some questions, thoughts on that.
Yeah. So that's gonna be really fun. Fourth edition really got away from a lot of the standard spell casting that we were used to, especially with the Vancian system, because their entire format went to the at-will, encounter, and daily powers. Really, that just overwrote all of it, because now you had the same level of actions, you had the same type of spells, so you really went more towards this series of types of spells that you had instead of a level of spells that you had. I mean, there were still spell levels within each type, but the category of spell casting really changed when you have the difference between at-will and encounter versus a system that's based off spell level memorization and preparation.
Right. Okay.
And once we got to 5th edition, this is where they introduced spell slots and prepared spells. So wizards, clerics, and other spellcasters would still use the Vancian system, but just with more flexibility. So it was, again, less about memorization, but still the preparation. So you still have your spell lists, but you still can only have access to them in limited numbers at any given time. So still the remnants of the Vancian system without the in-game lore of cast it once and forget it. Now it's just more of these are the spells that I'm ready to be able to cast, and this is the amount of magic I have stored in me to cast them.
Right. Interesting.
This is also where we get this more of a split between sorcerers and warlocks, being able to have more sorcery points kind of expanded, more into what they could do with their meta magic. And also this is where we get basically the introduction of cantrips as we know it. And what I mean by that is 5th edition is where we get the introduction of cantrips as proper spells. And I say that because when we when we cover the history of cantrips, that's a little bit of a misnomer that they introduced cantrips, because cantrips did get introduced prior to 5th edition. But I will say that cantrips as proper spells,
yes,
is what 5th edition
and that's what
did.
we were talking about a little bit earlier. Is they don't used to be.
It was magic. It wasn't spells.
It didn't used to really mean anything. Exactly. Like you were saying, it was more role play than anything. Almost the flavor text you don't like. You know what I mean? Exactly.
And so that was basically that's the kind of quick summary for y'all of the history of spellcasting. Really, the Vancian system has basically won out for the majority of the editions. It's just changed face lore-wise. You know what I mean?
And that's fair enough.
Even mechanically too, right? Like, I mean, it's all still working the same way. You still prep your spells, but how you prep them and what you say about them is really what's changed, right? You don't forget them. You just don't have enough magic in you.
Yes. And for me, it was hard for me to get behind you have to memorize the same spell twice. Like it was just a weird concept that you forget it, and I understand what they were trying to do, but I do much like the idea of hey, the only thing I'm expending is the magic inside of me, and I get that it's all right, I'm gonna focus on making sure I have these things ready for me to cast.
And that's what it's more like all of these spells, but it's in the morning you're okay, I'm gonna do fireball. That means I have to grab my mica or grab my piece and go this. So you're practicing it, right? So later that day, that's your muscle memory. Now the other spell just looks like this, but that's not what you practiced this morning. And are you really gonna test your life and your buddy's life on a spell you haven't practiced in 3 days?
Right.
But guess what? Last night and this morning, you were ready to do that spell. And that's what I think of spells, right? Now, granted, I also understand the frustration people have with the Vancian system in terms of OD, the original AD&D and 2nd edition, where you have to memorize. But I also, because I started with that, fundamentally it does make a lot of sense to me, right? Because it's not just you know, I think the reason why people have a problem with it is because people grasp magic differently, right? I think a lot of people think that spells are, okay, I think this is the verbiage I need to be using. I think people misunderstand the difference between spells and incantations. And I think that on average, people confuse D&D spells with incantations.
Interesting.
And what I mean by that is incantation, at least in the terminology that I understand it. So, you know, I may be wrong here. What's going on, Marty? I may be wrong on this one, but from my understanding, an incantation is a verbal like base spell, right? Think about like in Supernatural when they banish demons.
Mm-hmm.
That's an incantation. You say the words and the magic happens.
Okay.
It has nothing to do with what you're doing. It has, you know, you might need a tool like a cross, but think about that, right? If you've watched Supernatural and you've watched them banish them, all they do, and think about that, right? At first they needed the books because they needed to be able to recite it. Later in the series, they were able to banish a demon on the spot because they memorized the lyrics, right? They literally memorized the Latin. And so they could banish a demon at any time they wanted because they just knew. That's an incantation, right? What we would call a cantrip almost. But to me, because it was pure verbal, I call that an incantation. A spell is a lot more, right? It's a whole ordeal. And I think that's just a small change that I think when people think of like, I just do a spell, right? When I think of the memorization, it's not that you're just saying the words and so you've memorized how to say those words, right? It's not just because otherwise that would just be all your magic. You would just memorize every spell and you'd always have them. But it's not really that. It's the spell, it's the muscle memory, but also how second edition explained it, you're also gathering magic, right? Because magic doesn't come from anywhere. So when you're memorizing the spells, you're actually preparing it, truly preparing it. You're drawing in magic, you're practicing the muscle memory, but you're basically telling the magic, hey, when I do this, you're going to come out in this way. When I say these words, this is what it means. I always imagine that first hour of a magician's day or the mage's day is you're pulling in and you're telling that energy what it's for. And then you store it inside of you. And you say, this is your trigger when I do this spell. And again, the spells aren't elaborate, but you had to tell the magic what it needed to do. The incantation version that's doing all the work for you. The words and everything else that you're saying does the work. Whereas a spell, again, when we talk about prepare, it's like again, crafting a potion. It's not like it just boils the water instantly. You have to boil water. You have to let it simmer for the flavors to extract, right? You have to let it cool. Then you have to bottle it. Then you have to let it cool more. Then you have to cap it. That's preparing. But I think people, when they instinctually think of like D&D spells going off.
So your version is casting a spell is like drinking a potion.
More like the memorization of casting magic in the Vancian system is like brewing a potion.
Right.
Like that's what I'm
And then
thinking.
the casting of it would be just drinking it.
Like drinking a potion. Like
exactly.
Drinking
and so that's the
and that's where I'm thinking is, again, it's not a big deal, but I think that's the approach. When you hear people talk about the idea behind like, you know, memorization, I think that's just the disconnect is when I talk about memorization, people are like, that doesn't make sense if I know the words, but it's more than that. It's not just the words. You had to pull the magic in. You had to tell it what it needed to do. You had to tell it when to be ready. And you have to hold that in your body all day. Like you were a vessel of raw magic energy. The preparation was telling it where to be stored in your brain, your body, in order for you to just not, leak it or lose it, right? And that's why when you go to sleep, it's almost like a low level subconscious concentration.
So,
which is why you would lose it if you go to sleep.
It's interesting because it almost sounds like you're enchanting your body with magic.
Yes, that is.
It sounds like you're
you're
enchanting. Now, theoretically, if that's possible, like you would think the people that operate that way would be incredibly prone. It would take a small adjustment for them to enchant objects,
which is why enchanters are which is why I could see and there is a spell. That's why it's an easy spell. You can just learn enchanting and that's the spell. At least in second edition there is a spell just enchanting.
Interesting.
Where it's literally just a spell. You learn that spell and what it does is it opens up an item and then you can cast a spell into it and that spell goes in the item. And there's a whole myriad of things you could do. That's where you get permanency. You have the spell permanency, which is how you get permanent effects, magical effects on items. You open it up with enchant, you cast the magic into it, and then you permanent it, and then you close it, and now that thing is permanently enchanted. So yes, you're absolutely right. But it's a low level of enchantment. And actually, I'm now curious, real quick. I don't think so, but let me do a quick looking. Oh, that's why. Okay, no, never mind.
What happened?
You had just thought about it, or you just made me think about something, and then I had to go look up what Dispel Magic actually does.
Dispel Magic?
Because I was actually thinking about you mentioned it's kind of lightweight, like turning yourself into, or you're enchanting yourself.
Yeah.
And then I thought like, oh, does that mean you can Dispel Magic? Like I wonder, like, has anyone tried that? But Dispel Magic, you have to do a spell effect. A memorized spell has not gone off yet, so there's no effect
for you to be dispelling.
Magic. But what would also be interesting is if you have a party of humans and you have a human mage, you could technically rule as a DM that detect magic would detect the mage because they're storing magic in it. I would rule that a mage cannot hide from detect magic if they have memorized spells, at least on a second edition basis. Now, 5th edition, I don't know how you guys feel about that. I don't know how you all feel about magical creatures and spellcasters who have spells prepped. I don't know if they are considered magical auraed for detect magic.
I will say this: if they have a spellcasting focus, you can't hide from detect magic.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm curious if I would be interested to know. I think I would rule it that detect magic would detect the magic of memorized spells. Not a mage. If you're just a mage, that doesn't matter. But if you currently and actively have a memorized spell, I would say and maybe the more you have memorized, the bigger the beacon.
Interesting.
But that would, yeah, curious. Marty says, always played their character to be visibly more exhausted the more spell slots they used. I like that. Yeah, basically
I do like that.
And changing. Oh yeah. And I like that too, right? Like the idea. That's why I created my high point wizard class, because I wanted a wizard purely based off of fatigue, based off of pushing themselves to a brink of almost passing out or dying to want to use their magic, right?
To be able to do the things, whatever that may be.
And I wanted a magic user who wasn't bound by limitations, like game rule limitations. I wanted a magic user. I wanted a class that could do the things people actually want to do. Like when you have no magic left, when you're almost on the brink and you're like, I'm willing to save everybody to cast this spell, even if it costs me my life. Like I wanted that option because there isn't that. When you're a spellcaster, unless the spell itself, like unless it's fireball centered on you, there is no way to like dig deep. Once you're out of spells, you're out of spells. I wanted something that basically said, hey, you're not out of spells, you're just out of energy. If you push this, you're going to suck, you're going to take energy from yourself. Like the magic has to come from somewhere and you're the only source. And I like that danger, right? I like the idea of
I very much
being able to sacrifice permanent hit points or levels or just in general, your active state of life. Like I like these things being able to be on the table, and there just wasn't really an easy way to do it. Because I thought about doing it to where it's like, for every, I was trying to think of the math, like for every 15, 20 HP, you can have one spell slot worth of magic, like in later editions. Like you could do something like that, where if you really wanted to do that, anybody who does magic, just be like, okay, for X number, so it's like 10 HP for every level the spell is. So 90 HP for a level 9 spell. Like could be something like that.
Interesting.
It could be, 10% of your active HP, so your current level of HP or your max. It's 10% of your max HP, regardless of where you're at now, per level.
Okay.
So if you want to do a level 9 spell, it's going to take 90% of your max health. Doesn't matter where you're at, but you will suffer 90 points of your max health.
So would you say, because theoretically in 5th edition, if you do, it's either half or your hit point maximum over damage.
Yeah.
like past 0, then it's an insta death.
I think it's 50%. So that would be...
so theoretically, if you wanted to cast a 9th level spell, you'd be able to do it even if you didn't have 90%, but it would over damage you and potentially insta kill you.
Why not? That's not necessarily unbalanced if you could truly do a sacrificial move.
It's insta death, bro. Like,
right? And how, you know, like, 10% of your health for a level 1. You know what I mean? Because again, it's not about how powerful, how much health equals the power. It's how much it's taking out of you. If you have 10, you know, you could, you know,
if you got 10 hit points, but here's the deal: if you're at level 1, you only got level 1 spells.
Yeah.
So you cost a hit point for a spell. You know.
So maybe it's OP at lower levels. You know what I'm saying? Or you could be like 10% minimum 10 HP.
Sure.
So until they get to 100 HP, 10% hurts. Or it's 10% or a minimum of 10. So up until 100 HP, at level 1 still hurt.
Yeah.
It's still constantly hurting. But then once you're at 100 HP, now everything is 10%.
Now it's just straight up 10. Yeah.
So could be that.
Wild.
Could be that. So Marty says the way that they understand magic, at least in D&D, specifically 5e, is that magic all comes from the same source, the weave. Preparing spells is attuning to that specific school of magic and practicing that spell to make sure that you don't mess it up. In the spell components, could rule that if you want to cast a spell from your list that's not prepared, roll a d20, adding your spell casting modifier, and do 10 plus level of spell. If you fail, roll in the wild magic table. So basically, if you don't have it prepared, right? If it wasn't one of the spells you selected, you have to roll. You take the spell level of the spell plus 10.
Okay,
that's your mark. So let's
DC.
Say it's
that's your
5.
DC.
That's your DC.
Okay,
and then you roll against that DC with a D20 and your spell casting modifier.
Okay,
and if you fail, you then roll on the wild magic instead. That's a unique way of doing it.
I like that.
I'm not upset with it.
I like that.
I wouldn't use it mainly because I reserve wild magic a little bit differently.
I might tweak it a little bit, but at the very least, I love the concept of giving them an opportunity to try because it's something that they theoretically would know.
So what I would do is I do like I like the idea of trying to get away from something that they've prepared and having some sort of fault with it. Or, you know, having some sort of difficulty because they didn't, you know, prep it. Like, honestly, if you wanted to do something like that, what I would almost suggest is if it's a spell they know, like it's on their list or in their book, but they just didn't have it prepared, make it more like the old school D&D or the second edition spell fail, where there's a percentage chance. And the percentage chance is the level of the spell. So 10% for every level. So if it's on your spell list, you don't have it prepared, and level 1, you have a 10% chance of it not going off or failing. If it's a 9th level spell, it's a 90% chance. Like, it's basically, you don't have it prepared, so you have a percentage chance of just not... So
I like that, and it gives you a reason to use the D100, because we don't use that nearly enough.
But I do like where Marty's going, so what I would take Marty's idea, and I would flip it on its head. I would say, okay, to do your own... a spell that you know but don't have prepared, it's a percentage chance of failure equal to the spell level. 10% equal to the spell level. So, you know, 10, 20, 30. But if you want to try to cast a spell that's not on your spell list.
Oh, like a spell you shouldn't even know.
Then Marty's rule applies.
Oh, so like, say you've seen somebody else cast invisibility and you haven't theoretically learned invisibility, but you want to try and cast it.
You can try it if it's not on your spell list, but if you fail, wild magic. Because you're tapping into something you don't understand. That, to me, logically, is what makes more sense to trigger wild magic. Because you're literally, it's almost like tapping into something you don't understand, and then you didn't do it right. So what did you tap into? You have no fucking clue.
Who freaking knows?
You did it wrong. And then wild magic makes sense because now you're going to find out what you touched that you weren't supposed to.
Well, shit.
So there's another option for you for 5th edition peeps if you want to expand the limitations of spellcasters in their moment of need. Because how many times have you been in those good battles and you're like, sorry guys, I'm out. You're just like, I tried, I threw all my spells at him, and I couldn't.
I really desperately want a mechanic, like a dig deep mechanic for being like so badly. And
Yeah.
I really, and it really does suck when you have the perfect spell for this moment. It's just theoretically not prepared. And like giving them an opportunity to potentially save the day, even though it's in the, like, I very much agree. That is a missed opportunity for a mechanic.
And I think doing just a spell fail is fine because you know the spell. You're familiar with it. You're not trained on it in that moment.
I think that's a good
So
idea
it's
for our
literally just
what's the thing?
Oh, the ADMG, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to put that in there.
That should be in there.
But yeah, so I would do that because I do like your concept of having the ability to reach out, but I think the wild magic, I just think it needs something more triggering. Because if it's magic that you know, I wouldn't really justify wild magic because you're in a sphere that you know.
Right.
It's just more likely that it's going to blow back on you because you're not in control of it. Whereas if you're trying to do a spell that's not on your list.
So what would happen if it didn't work? If you cast a spell that you know, but
is not prepared.
It fell in the 10% area.
I just want it to be a spell fail. You lose your spell slot, but it's a spell fail.
Just super basic.
You just
lose
the spell.
Okay,
but nothing happens.
Okay,
because you tried to cast magic, and you weren't prepared. You weren't ready, and it was a dud. But you still lose. Like, I'm not a big fan that when magic doesn't go off, you keep the magic. I'm not a fan of that at all. Like, if you try and fail a spell, you've lost that attempt. Like, if you have only so many attempts,
I do agree.
I am not a fan that when people, because I've worked with DMs who have ruled, or players who demand that if the spell misses or doesn't go off, I should not lose the slot. And I'm like, that's stupid. Because you basically expanded everything but the magic. How does that make sense? Like, you attempted it. That's like saying, hey, I as a fighter, I get 2 attacks per round, right? But if I miss, I didn't take my attack. That's what you're telling me as a spellcaster is if I cast Fireball and no one gets hit, or if I cast this and it misses my attack, the spell doesn't go off. And it's like, okay, so as a fighter, if I miss my attack, I didn't actually attack. If I'm a ranger and I miss my attack, do I not expend my ammo? Like, I don't like that argument that
right.
the spell, like, no, the spell should always go off when you say I'm casting magic. The effect doesn't have to happen, but you expended it. Like, it's like firing a gun, right? If a gun has a misfire, you don't get that bullet back. You don't get to just rack it, grab that bullet and shove it back in there and fire. That bullet is gone, right? So why would the magic be there? That's how I also look. Another way to look at it is like, it's a misfire. That whatever you did was a dud and you've just expended that cartridge. Oh, okay. So Marty says the reason why the chosen of wild magic is because that's not quite part of the weave that you're attuned to. So it's the part of the weave that is kind of like the chaotic aspect that you're not.
I would say your statement still makes sense on that front, because if it's magic, it's just not prepared. You're tuned to that part of the weave. You're just not tapped into it.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's outside of your spell list, then you are very much not attuned to that part of the weave.
You tried to reach for a part that you thought you knew.
Exactly.
But you don't know where. It's like you just reach into a black hole. And you're
exactly. You're reaching blind. Yes.
Yeah. I do kind of like that though too. Like, it's like I really do like I wish wild magic was used more. Like, I don't want everybody to be able to have wild magic, but I do wish wild magic had more mechanics, like more things that like this, ways that wild magic would come up, because it's a great option. But kind of like what we talked about in the last community stream, wild magic to me feels on par with how gods are in D&D right now. They're there. It's an option. It's mostly back in the lore, and we're not really encouraging you to use it, but it's there. It has mechanics. I feel like it's not encouraged. I feel like there's no real need or push for it. I feel like it's they dropped it in.
I'll say,
and just
I feel like wild magic as it is, I feel like the wild magic table, for me personally, when it comes to what wild magic is supposed to feel like, it doesn't feel like it's enough.
I agree. I don't use the table myself. I use it as a reference to kind of get an idea, but I always do my own wild magic.
And yeah. So like, I genuinely want to create a a new wild magic sorcerer. I think a wild magic sorcerer should not be, I feel like it should be its own version of sorcerer. Like, I don't even think it should be like a subclass necessarily. I think that class should just operate differently, kind of like psionics does in general.
I would really like, you know, if for a wild magic sorcerer, what I would love is something more of, because I still like the chaoticness, but I don't want the randomness. I would love it to be where you can control category,
yes,
and range.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So like I want to do an illusionary spell, and you get ranges of 1 to 3, maybe 2 to 5. So there's some overlap, like 1 to 3, 3 to 5, or 2 to 5. But you would basically select, I'm going to roll this range, like a low, medium, or high level spell. So like 1 to 3, 3 to 5, 6 to 9 or whatever. So it's like, I'm going to roll one of these categories, and I want to do an illusionary spell. So then after they cast that, they would either do rolls on tables, or they would just roll like a D10 or whatever for the level of the spell, and then just like reroll ones or whatever, or DM choices number 10. But they roll what level of spell randomly within that subset of categories. So that I want to do a mid spell, so they'd roll like a D6, and every other one's a 4 versus a 5. And then they would be like, I want to do an illusionary spell. So either you have a preset table or DM choice, and then I almost I
like that, but I almost like the idea, like, you very much exactly what you're talking about. It's like, hey, this is what I want out of the spell, right? So like, I want it to be an attack spell, and I want it to be a range of like 90 feet because they're roughly 90 feet away, right? And that gives you like a certain DC. And so because it's wild magic, it almost doesn't matter what their AC is. It just matters like how well I do the spell. So like I roll and I have to beat that DC, and then it doesn't. I don't know what the magic type is going to be. I don't know what the I don't know what the damage type is going to be, but it will hopefully reach the target. But if it's like, if you roll underneath it, then you either didn't reach the target.
It almost sounds like what you would do with that then, in that particular case, is you'd have a class where they kind of mimic everybody else, where it's almost like they are like a sorcerer. They have every spell list open to them. So basically they have every list, and they can choose any spell, but the spell gets randomized. So like you were saying, so I want this spell to cast. So it's the, the level, all the stuff, but everything else gets jumbled. Instead of fire, it's ice. Instead of this range, it's this range. Instead of one target, it's 2 targets, or instead of 3 targets, it's 1 target. But so almost kind of like where, because again, you'd have to make it to where it's easily accessible. You wouldn't want to put all of the work on the DM to create it, right? So
sure,
how do you basically say like, hey, if they want to cast this spell, either you have to change at least 2 characteristics of it, or here's how you justify like how. But I do like the idea of wild magic being more than just literally here's a random spell. Like I want more of the idea that it's chaotic, not random.
Yes,
because that's the problem right now. Is they try to make it feel, oh, it's goofy, it's random, it's memey, and it's like, no, it should actually be chaotic. It should actually be something that we don't understand. And I kind of like this. Or just, man, how about this? What if every spell, here's another idea for the DMG, or for the ADMG. What if we went to every spell and added a wild magic variant? So like, if this spell is chosen, but from a wild magic perspective, like this changes. You know what I mean? Like, I'm curious what we could do to add like variants if someone of a wild magic background. Because again, instead of it being a random spell you cast, you still know what type you're trying to cast, but you wouldn't be in control of it.
Interesting. I do kind of like that, because there's Lucifer's rings. We had each one of them had like Alara's Grace that was added onto it.
Yes.
There's this other category of like an offshoot called what was it called? Level Up Adventurer's Guide or something like that. It was like a alternate version of the rules, kind of like an adjustment, kind of like a different edition of 5th edition. Just some adjustments. Grace
was like a better idea, because it's like these were all standalone things, but unless
I'll say
a certain trigger happened, which would be like a class.
In that there was this thing that all the spells had, and it was like a souped up version of each one of the spells that could like do something. Like, I like the idea of having like augments for spells that you can like either earn or get over time, or like figure out how to cast, because I think that there's a lot of potential for a lot of spells, but because they're so specific and there's really no clean way to like adjust a spell. It's like, hey, I love this spell, but gosh, I wish it could do X, Y, and Z. Gosh, I wish it could do this thing. And
I
like,
got it. I know a way. Messy, but I know a way you could do it. You would rock, paper, scissors it. So it would almost be, wild magic would almost have to be a version of like meta magic in its approach, where you select a spell and then you could select a modification, but kind of like rock, paper, scissors, whatever modification you chose would affect something else. So like if you wanted damage to go up, it would automatically reduce range. If you want range to go up, it changes the element. If you change the element, it will change the target. If you change the target, it'll, so you could have almost like a thing where it's like you could change any one of these elements, but then you have a chart of if you change this, that element of the spell.
That would be really fun to put into like a little Excel thing. So
it would be very,
like,
yeah.
It would automatically shift everything. So you didn't have to, like you said, you don't want to put too much work on the DM to like figure out what all that stuff's going to do.
You just want like a chart where you can like just go, okay, you're changing this. Well, then this is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
That would be very interesting.
Yeah, definitely worth thinking of in terms of like how wild magic should be utilized. Instead of a wild magic sorcerer, a chaos mage. Yeah. Ooh, someone who's not attuned to the weave, just pulling random junk just to see what, like literally just a blind mage, like a chaos mage. You're just randomly ripping things into the universe at random. So quite literally a all spells rip. That would be fascinating.
That feels so dangerous. Like so dangerous. Like you just pull it there, and instead of pulling out like a lightning bolt, you pull out a demon and summon him. Like just
oh yeah, you try to do like lightning bolt, and then you do summon lesser demon.
I'm like, what? Get the front door out of here.
There's just too many spells though. That's the problem. Like there's just too many. Like you'd almost have to have a category of spells that are like instinctual spells. You know, nothing too complex. Nothing that would require like you'd almost want to do that to where it's like you'd have a chaos mage who can cast anything that's verbal somatical only, or like doesn't require a material component, or you know what I mean, like, or maybe it only requires a material component. Like you'd have to give them a limitation where they only have access to spells that would make sense for them to randomly be able to just grab. You know what I mean?
Interesting. Marty says pick level in school.
Yeah, could do that too.
I could see that.
Replace the standard wild magic chart with the chart of Rod of Wonder.
Oh, I like the Rod of Wonder, the Rod of Wonders chart. It's got a lot of, but again, it doesn't all feel like spell magic. You know, like a lot of the times it just feels like almost the deck of many things kind of random, like because everything that you get out of there doesn't necessarily feel like it would be the effect of a spell or the effect of the weave doing something. It just feels like there's these, again, random events. While all that could be theoretically caused by magic, just doesn't feel like it would naturally come from that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that one. I agree. Okay, interesting. All right, so. All right, moving on from that tangent. Okay, so we also wanted to talk about concentration tonight. We have concentration, we have cantrips that we also want to get through. So we've already went through the summary of spellcasting. So let's take a look at the history of concentration real quick, because it hasn't been quite the same throughout all of the editions. So starting in first edition, OD&D still, we're kind of just combining those.
Gotcha.
There was not a formal mechanic to concentration. And this kind of surprised me. I expected concentration to be from the get-go.
Same.
But concentration as a mechanic. Marty says good tangent. Thank you so much. Yeah, so the concept of concentration was there, but we didn't call it concentration. We didn't have a official idea behind it. The closest thing that we got was that certain spells did have identifiers or descriptions. In the description, you sometimes would find that the spell would say that it will last as long as you are undisturbed. So these are the breadcrumbs. So this was the first iteration of concentration. There was no mechanic, there was no rule, there was no category. But if a spell said something along the lines of you had like invisibility and polymorph were two of the ones that I was able to easily find. But there was no explicit like you need to be concentrating for this long, but there were interruption rules. So any spell that was being cast, actively being cast, could be interrupted. Physically, you could attack them or do something. And then once they were in a spell, and really what it was like you had spells like invisibility. The verbiage was as long as you don't get interrupted, and interrupted basically meant things like being attacked or taking, basically taking damage or something like that. So for the most part, the concentration was basically you can stay invisible as long as like.
Would you say the same sort of jostling someone would do to wake somebody up would disturb you, even though it's not technically taking damage?
I think in this particular case, like if you're like, I would look at this as like, I'm sure from like what I understand this to be, because it was a lot on the DM, if someone bumped into you while you were invisible, you'd probably have to make a roll. But if someone like shoved you or a barrel fell on you and you got knocked over, you're out.
Gotcha.
Like you're out of invisibility. It's really the idea of a true interruption. Don't have to take damage, but yeah, something falls off a cart rolling past you and knocks you to the ground, you're out of invisibility. A guard steps back and bumps into you, you're most likely going to have a roll to keep it up, because it's not really dropping it.
Right.
It's not like the new D&D movie where you tap someone and pff, you're there, right? Because if you think about it, that is definitely more of the better way to call an illusionary spell. And I really do think, actually, another hot tangent here, I think invisibility actually should be split into two different spells. I think there should be invisibility spell and invisibility illusion. I truly do think that those things should be split. And I think, honestly, there needs to be more illusion spells of the very spells that we have. I think there are more spells that could be categorized as illusion, but not be the same spells as we have now.
What school of magic would the non-illusionary invisibility be?
Alteration, probably. Or yeah, I could see it being alteration, because what I'm thinking, right, is the difference between like an invisibility magic, like a visibility spell, that's magic transforming you. You are no longer visible. Whereas an illusionary is no one can see you. Like an illusion is like a perception. So I look at it, the reason why I say this should be different is an illusionary invisibility. If someone bumps into you, I can imagine it just being gone. Just instantly, oh, you're there, you're standing there. I'm no longer disillusioned that you're not. It's like a perception filter. But a spell version of invisibility, I should be able to bump into you. I should be able to go, there's a person here. That should be magic spell. I should be able to touch an invisible person and go, there's an actual human being. I can feel a head, I can feel shoulders, I can feel a hand. But
you would say that wouldn't qualify as an illusion.
But again, like an illusion to me is not real. You are not really invisible. I just perceive you as invisible.
But you wouldn't. So
like again, I'm saying.
But, okay, so
imagine
like
a power level.
So take the disguise self spell, right? That to me is the same thing. It's an illusion, and unless somebody, according to the spell's description, unless somebody physically investigates you,
yeah.
Like they're not going to be able to recognize.
Yeah, so they can bump into you, and that's fine. But the moment they dive deep, they're going to peel away those layers.
But it's not to say that you don't still look like that. It's not to say that you don't still appear to be that thing. It's just that they recognize that that's
they see through the disguise.
So I would say that would be the same is true for the invisible person. It wouldn't stop them from being invisible. It would just mean that, oh, I know that there's an invisible person
but that's
here
why
now.
I say but that's where I think there should just be two different spells. I like the idea of an illusionary spell basically altering perception but not actually doing anything, whereas an invisibility spell is physically making me invisible. It's actual like real raw magic making me invisible. So you could touch me, you could hold your hand, and I'm still invisible, whereas an illusion, literally doing anything to break the illusion, literally the magic's no longer working. Your perception of the world is no longer faked.
I guess that's
I like
where
the idea of two different levels of magic.
If that was the case, then I would think that the second you bumped into somebody, their disguised self would disappear too, because then that illusion would immediately disappear.
It depends on how you would categorize it. I mean, as I said, that's why I think there should be a separation. I think illusionary magic shouldn't just be a spell that is just categorized that way. I think illusionary magic does deserve to be its fresh own category with spells that either work slightly differently or slightly like dulled down versions of other higher level spells. Because I really think that that's, to me, I like the idea of it not just being I take the word a little bit more literally, like illusion. I like that to be a certain type of thing, like things that aren't real but appear to be. Whereas spells actually make real stuff. They actually make things happen. And I think that's where I would like to draw more of a line, because I think illusionary spells,
I think I get the line you're trying to make.
It's the idea of magic is real in D&D. So I would like to draw a line, and even if it's just a low level, like maybe there's just more low level illusionary spells, right? Not necessarily locked away to an illusionist. Or maybe it is. Maybe you only get it if you play a specified illusionist. But I would like these spells that when you classify them as illusion, I would like that to take on a different connotation than just meaning it changes how things look, right? But I do like the idea that it in and of itself isn't real, whereas other magic makes it real.
Interesting.
And it's definitely a different concept, but I think
I see the direction you're trying to go with that mindset. I just when I try to wrap my head around what illusionary magic is, I envision you are making things like, I envision like, yes, I can make an illusion in your mind, right? Like I can affect your brain to do something specific, or I can affect reality to do something different.
That's almost kind of what we're talking about, right? So the idea of if you bumped into someone that was affecting your mind's no longer affected, versus if you bumped into them and they are being affected, you don't. That's another way to put it, is the difference between illusion is more of I'm affecting not what's real, but what you think is real.
Right.
Real
like,
spells actually affect what's real.
I think a lot of there's this one fight in Naruto when I think Sasuke's fighting his brother or something like that, and they're going to this weird throne room, and he immediately jumps into combat and starts like throwing hands with this dude, and they're like jumping all the way around the room, and he finally kills him, and they looks back over to the throne and his brother hasn't moved. Because all that battle that just happened was in his head, because they're doing whatever their eye chakra thing is. They're messing, some jutsu allows them to like mess with the perception of the person that's there. And so it's almost like you're fighting in a different world or fighting something that doesn't exist or isn't really there. So that's kind of how I view that type of stuff, which, to be honest, like, there's not that much kind of stuff like that in D&D. I think
illusionary magic could be almost like how psionics were a branch out. I think illusionary magic, because I've always loved the concept of an illusionist, but whenever you build it through D&D books, illusionists are boring. Like illusionists are literally just, there's a few extra spells you get, but you don't really get the feeling that, again, I like the feeling of kind of like the idea of cantrips, right? There's a feeling of, if I'm a mage and I'm a magic user, I should just have things that I can just do. As an illusionist, I feel like there's also a different level of control of what's actually happening in the real world, like what you're actually doing. And I don't want to diminish it saying you're just a lower level wizard, but I want your things to be more subtle and less, I'm physically changing the reality and the matter. I'm really just changing what you think is going on, right? So instead of the spells of changing a physical item from one material to the other, I can just make something look shinier and more polished than it really is. Almost the same thing, but a slightly different spell.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily to rewrite the wheel, but I want it to have a different feel. I want that to make it believe that I'm actually an illusionist and not just a magic user that changes reality. That's not the same thing to me.
Interesting.
And I think you could be more creative with the type of spells you get.
It's hard for me because I feel like, yes, they are very much different things, but also it feels like two opposite sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
To me.
And that's why I just think of it like an expansion, like how psionics tried something new. I would like even as a subclass. So I think Lucifer said it here, topic idea. We should write this down too for ideas. Creating a new spell for illusion or another category. So I do like that. So we could do
new spells for illusions. Okay. Or other. Yeah. Like, I'll say, I think Hecate. It was Hecate if you're still in chat. The Ice Monarch. That was Hecate, right?
Yes, I think so.
And he created a whole list of ice spells and like stuff like that is beautiful. Like, so I really like that idea, Lucifer, like that type of content where you're actually like expanding what's out there.
Yeah,
you know, they did those undead spells where you can like summon different types of undead and like do different things with that. So I okay, I'm here for that. I'm gonna add those to our stream ideas.
And it's also good too, because you know we kind of talk a lot about it in homebrew and a little bit on the deep dives, but that would give us an opportunity to kind of showcase a little bit about our homebrew process. And like the steps that we take while we're doing it, instead of just, you know, now, which we're kind of spitballing, but what would we research? How would we look into, why do we think it's balanced? How do we justify it? How do we test it? I kind of like that idea. So we'll definitely look into that. Hecate just popped up. Nice name. You did Ice Monarch, right? Where you created all those spells? That's what we were asking, is if we wanted to confirm that you were the one doing that.
That's what it was. Yeah. I was commenting on Lucifer's idea to create spells for different classes or for different, you know, subclasses or for different genres. And I really like a lot of the themes that you have when you're creating those like little separate spell lists. And you were even talking earlier about your curse spell list. So that'll be another opportunity for us to look at little expansions like that. So, yeah, especially if we do one of those homebrew process episodes, I'd love to have people like Hecate and Pokeniner and Des who like have all those.
Maybe for November, community stream.
Okay,
maybe we'll put that on the list for people to vote for, and we'll do a.
That would be cool,
because we're already going to do, well, so far, if the vote hasn't changed, I don't think it has. I think we are still doing. Yeah, it's still pop culture build. We'll do a little bit of our homebrew process doing the pop culture build, but maybe in November we'll do like a whole spell day or something, or we'll do some more homebrew creations on that. All right. So we were at Marty said also something like invisibility would make you disappear completely. Perception filter would be like a certain number of creatures no longer perceive that you're there.
Yeah.
So almost like a benefit to like it's almost like perception filter would be a spell. Here you go. So invisibility makes you invisible. The spell perception filter, for, you know, Doctor Who reference, but like, or that would be the chameleon arc. Maybe the spell chameleon arc or perception filter. Even if it wasn't a number of creatures,
almost like an aura effect on that.
But let's see. So you were saying that a certain number of creatures no longer perceive you're there. Interesting. I'm trying to think of like, how would you, other than the number of creatures, like how would you differentiate the perception filter from actual invisibility? Oh, no. Here's how you do it. So perception filter, if that was on you, instead of it being invisible, it grants you the ability to hide without shadows.
Hide basically in plain sight?
Yes. So if you were under the effect of perception filter, you could take the hide action in plain sight, in plain view. You could be right here and just be like, I take the hide action. And
now the question would be, because it would be like, okay, how long? Because this is already a thing that I find a little bit challenging in D&D. So there's really no set rules of when you take the stealth action, like how long does it last for, right? And did they see you the second before you took the hide action? Or are you specifically trying to hide before? Like the whole idea of like how exactly you implement that, I think is
that's why I'm not a huge fan of it, like in the middle of combat being able to do it, because like if an enemy is aware of you and is tracking you, now granted, I don't mind it like if every enemy is actively engaged and it's been stated that enemy has attacked that person, that enemy has attacked that person, that enemy has attacked that person, and the rogue goes, hey, every enemy is currently engaged. I take the hide action and none of them are paying attention to me. I'm totally fine with that. But if you slash someone and then just run 10 feet directly behind yourself, like you know, you take the disengage action and you run 10 feet in a straight line behind yourself and then hide, do you think the enemy didn't just watch you walk away and then just duck in that corner, in that shed? Like that's where I agree. When it comes to role play, when it comes out of combat, it's usually very obvious when they can take care of it. Because I always do. It's like, hey, you obviously know to look around and wait for someone not to be watching, and you know when to do it. But in combat, if you just damage somebody, why would they take their eyes off of you?
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Unless they're literally being flanked and being attacked from multiple fronts.
And that's fine. If you want to use that as a defense, like, I'm totally cool with that. But you can't be like, have the enemy face you and then leave in their periphery or like within their cone of vision and then take the hide action. Like, you're not going to know. Or duck behind something and then take the hide action. Like, I mean, to that case, I would usually make sure that they move first. Like, if they duck and say, would this get me out of their visual? I'd say yes. And if they want to take the hide action, I'd require that they move. Because if you don't move, you're not technically hiding, you're just out of sight. You're concealed, but you're not hiding. Hiding would require you to be in a place they do not know. So that's where I would like, in a combat situation, that's how I would rule it, is you have to justify being able to get away from their vision. Now, if you could justify it by saying, hey, I take the dash action to get like out of their sight, and I'm specifically going to go behind my buddy. And then as soon as I do, I'll jump in shadows, kind of do the movie thing. Right. Someone does that, whatever. Or like being the rogue, be like, hey, I'm going to hold my action. And on his turn, he says he's going to go and attack this guy. So when he moves in front of me, I'm going to trigger my turn and then hide in shadows. Why couldn't you do that? You know, like the movie thing, right? Where the bus goes by and then suddenly the person's gone. Why can't you use that in combat to be like, hey, when the paladin runs by me, I'm gone. Because I'm going to be the guy that I'm engaged with. He's not going to see me. I'm being attacked by this archer and he just hasn't lit up and I can't hide because he's been watching me. So I'm going to specifically use the moment one of my characters blocks line of sight and then I'm going to use the hide. That would be cool and I would allow it. But if an archer's just been firing you all day, he obviously knows where you're at.
Theoretically, could you... See, I think this could work less. But like theoretically, if you're like running past a tree or something like that, is that the same sort of effect? You know, you're basically breaking line of sight. So if I'm running past a bunch of trees and all of a sudden, and then you don't see me anymore.
If the situation was correct and that was the narrative, yes. It's more complicated than just there's an obstacle, I'm just going to run past it and then it's gone.
Exactly.
But yes, in a situation where you could easily understand that they're trying to track
you and then all of a sudden
you're gone. I would rule that in a blink that you're gone. It's just not going to happen. You don't just walk up to someone, punch them and go,
you didn't see anything.
Like, that's just not going to happen, right? You're going to get their attention. And that's kind of where I would like to draw the line.
Interesting.
Okay, so we're gonna get some more stuff from Hecate tomorrow.
Oh yeah, I'm excited for that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's you're gonna have to try a little bit harder, Marty, if you're gonna get a Doctor Who reference past me like that. Totally have never used a creature that works like the silence and make my players go crazy. I would never. Yeah, of course not. No one's ever forgotten anything at a game and just decided it. I mean, the closest thing that D&D has is the False Hydra. I mean, that's basically a version of the silence.
Yeah.
But it's more of a global silence than it is a individual.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, no, I have a version of I have a lot of Doctor Who races in my at least versions of them in my realm. I don't like 1-to-1, but there's a lot.
You know what I put in my realm? We were talking about it on a couple streams ago, but I love them so much. The Observers from The Fringe.
Oh yeah,
that series where they're just kind of like in and out of time, some sort of like they're these strange celestial beings, but just they watch sometimes. Rarely do they intervene, but you know, yeah.
The Krillitane. That was actually one of my favorite races that I ripped from Doctor Who. The Krillitane.
The Krillitane?
Yeah, it's a race that spreads throughout the universe, and whenever they find, they just conquer and feed and just go. They're basically a parasite. But whenever they find a race that they come across that has traits that they like, they can consume it and take on those traits.
So they're the Borg?
Kind of. So like if they want to fly, they can find a race that flies, and if they consume it, they can mutate and get that flying ability. And then as they breed, their offspring now has it.
And so they just permanently add it to their race.
Yeah, and they can just look.
That's
just,
wild.
So over centuries, and depending on what region you find them in, they could look completely different because of how they've evolved and taken on different forms.
That's wild. That's really wild. Okay.
Oh yeah, Weeping Angels are also a good one, especially if you use them properly. Like Weeping Angels are such a good plot point if you use them properly and don't just use them to like kill, but if you actually use them the way that they're meant to be used and they get thrown in back in time.
Oh yeah.
Such a good plot point.
Oh yeah.
And I don't remember what the slivers. Remind me which one of the slivers are. Is that from Doctor Who?
That does not sound familiar.
I don't remember that one from Doctor Who.
It does sound quite intriguing. Nothing else.
Oh, that's from Magic the Gathering.
Oh, ha.
Not surprising. All right, where were we? Oh yeah, so concentration, first edition. Wasn't a thing. Some spells just said, if you get hit, take damage, or are otherwise disturbed, the spell ends.
Okay.
But also keep in mind, there was no official rule that said you can only be doing this one at a time, and there was no rule that said casting another spell interrupted you. So it was kind of left up to the DM and the table on how that rule played out. So if you're invisible and you're not being interrupted, can you also then start flying? As long as you're not interrupted, why can't you hold both spells? Because it never specifically said as an option that casting another spell was an interruption.
Interesting.
So it left a large hole in this whole thing. So you can see where that went, right?
Or a large opportunity for people to potentially min-max / abuse / stack their spells to be freaking godlike or whatever.
Yes. So that's kind of what ended up happening. So with second edition, we do get a little bit more rule sets, but still not a full universal mechanic for concentration. But we do get a few more defining rules of when those spells require some sort of, concentration, basically.
Okay.
When, with the lack of interruption, they did try to refine those so it wasn't as bad. So some of the spells did require that you had to maintain them. Others didn't. And then it still was just not very like one of the ones I've had. Oh yeah. So like the spell telekinesis, it did say it required like concentration, like as in it's not just you cast it and the thing follows you around. Like you had to pay attention to the telekinesis. And then so if someone walked over and slapped you in the face, you'd lose concentration.
Was that automatic or did you?
I believe so. I think as long as you got like, I think with that one, physical attacks. But yeah, but there was no like universal rule. So it was like one spell like telekinesis would say that you have to, maintain concentration. You basically have to maintain like looking and paying attention to this object to maintain holding it. And so if you got attacked or pushed over, you would lose contact. There was no save or anything.
Got you.
But there might be another rule that says as long as you're not physically damaged, you can hold on to this. And then there might be another one that says,
and that's all inside the spell itself that it'll say.
So there wasn't anything formal. There wasn't one rule that said if it says concentration, this is what it means. Every spell was left to be interpreted. The spells were refined to help better understand. Like telekinesis was basically written in a way that made you realize, okay, I probably can't do another spell on top of this, because the way that it was written made you kind of imagine that you're doing this, right? Like, if I try to do another spell, I lose this. But that's not the same as saying you're holding concentration. That's just saying that that's what that spell requires.
Okay.
But again, because it was left open to interpretation, there was absolutely no rule that said, as long as a spell didn't give you specifics, like I remember off the top of my head, but I think telekinesis said like you had to be looking at the object, like as long as you maintained like
it with inside your cone of vision.
So kind of that whole thing, right? But there were other spells that just said as long as you're not interrupted. as long as you're not attacked. So people took that and said, well, as long as I'm not interrupted casting invisibility, and as long as I'm not attacked flying, why can't I have both? Because casting a spell isn't being attacked.
Right.
And that's what happened, is towards second edition, you got a lot more of these featured spells, and you got a lot more of them, but then people started realizing, well, there's nothing that says I can't do these together.
Yeah.
It says I can't do this and do that spell, but it doesn't say I can't do these together. It just says that they both have to be maintained, and maintaining is not the same thing as concentration.
And as long as like I keep this one in my vision and I keep listening to this one, then I should be fine.
And then keep in mind how psionics worked. Psionics was, as long as you had the power points, you could have as many up as you wanted. Just one at a time can be activated.
That's why.
But you can just keep, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So magic was definitely a lot more fluid when it came to that. So it basically did. It did lean into a lot of people min-maxing, a lot of people abusing it, and they realized that. So they did push for a lot more formalization.
Let's have some actual rules.
Yes. So in third edition, what they wanted to do is they realized that this concept of these spells that they had been catering towards, this idea that they have more of your attention, they finally wanted to like lock that in. So this is the first edition where concentration actually became more of a formalized mechanic. And with that, we got a little bit of a difference though. It wasn't still the concentration that we had today, because concentration wasn't just part of maintaining the spells, but it was actually a skill that wizards were allowed to learn.
That's right. That's what you were talking about.
Yeah. So the difference is they did formalize the mechanic behind what a concentration spell meant.
Okay.
But it wasn't just a mechanic. It wasn't just a quality of these. Hoylepa, hello. How's it going?
Welcome, Hoylepa.
So
Good
yeah,
morning.
I really do like the fact that they had this skill-based system. So the concentration skill, and I know this is what you want to hear, is that what the caster would need to do is roll a concentration check, which was a D20 plus skill modifiers. So any skill modifiers that allowed them to do a concentration check.
Okay.
To maintain the spell under duress. So basically, if anything happened to them, this was their spell check.
Okay.
Or their concentration check to keep it going. So if they were taking damage, being jostled, so like you were saying,
got
like
you,
trying to be woken up,
shaking you awake, or whatever,
dealing with environmental hazards, so you can't just walk through fire and maintain a spell. Like
got you.
That's doesn't have to be damage, but it has to be enough to take your attention. Right?
Yes,
it has to be enough to stop you concentrating on something. And then at higher levels, though, that specialization was dangerous, because if you specialized in concentration, you could basically become just shy of unstoppable. Like
specifically with concentration spells.
Like there would be no way to interrupt your spell casting. Like at higher levels, you could basically become immune to interruption, or nearly immune to interruption, because your DC save with all your spell checks and everything, and your skill in it would basically mean that the distraction would have to be just
crazy.
Like you got stabbed through the heart. Like
a nuke went off next to you.
Yeah, you might still shrug that off just with these rolls.
Golly.
And then, of course, along with this, third edition also put some more limits on spell casting. So while we have the concentration as an official mechanic, there were still multiple types of spells that could be layered and do ongoing effects. So they did want to keep that. They did want to keep the creativity, but they realized that there was a little bit
too much leniency.
Yeah. So some of the more powerful spells took the concentration route, so they could like limit which ones could really be mapped onto each other.
I feel like that makes sense.
But there was actually an infamous term that I kept running into. But actually back in those days, it was actually called buff stacking. There was actually just a term that everyone used called just buff stacking, where it was just known, if you're a mage, you're like, are you a buff stacker? Like, yeah, I buff stack. Like, okay. Like, fuck you. Like, okay, it's gonna be that kind of a game.
That does feel very Magic the Gathering-y, because you know you always have some money. Are you playing whatever kind of deck? And you're like, all right, well, fuck you.
You playing a burn deck? Okay.
All right. I see what you're doing here.
7 a.m. Well, good morning to you. Good morning, all the way to Germany. Let's see. So yeah, so this is like another one that I was able to find is like even in third edition, you could still pull off things like flight. So like the fly spell, stone skin, and mage armor without any penalties. So you could like stack several spells that weren't all concentration.
I will say I try to do that now because there are some spells that don't require concentration, and you got to be very creative. Like one of my favorites is Blink. I love Blink. Blink sends you to another dimension, and you don't have to concentrate on it, so you can have that up and have. Imagine concentrating on Call Lightning while you're blinking, right? All I have to do is be in this plane of existence with my action, call down lightning, and then I'm gone again. You can't. That to me is. That's the kind of stuff that I would like to try and buff stack whenever possible. But I think that I like the idea that they limited it so that you're not invincible, right? There's always a way to get you.
Halibut has a good one for a friend of his has a good way of dealing with rules lawyers when it comes to spells.
Oh yeah,
is if they're starting to annoy the DM, all he has to do, and the rules lawyer is just having a bunch of issues with the spells, or just constantly repeating them. He just has a simple question of, hey, what spell components does that spell need? That's a way to shut up a spellcaster. Be like, you want to start talking about components there, bud? How much you carrying? You want to start talking about encumbrance? How much gold do you have on you? Do you have enough pouches for that? Like, there's a lot of way to shut up a rules lawyer. Be like, oh, you want to play by the rules, do you? You tell me exactly how much gear do you have on you right now?
Goodness gracious.
Okay, so where were we? Okay, so that was 3rd edition. So yeah, so 3rd edition recognized there were some problems, try to fix it.
Sure.
But still left the fun, still left the creativity, still left the spell stacking. Obviously, 4th edition took a much different approach. We really didn't have concentration because you had the daily at-will powers, and spells worked a bit differently. So, if a spell would only last for an encounter or a set number of rounds, they didn't really look at a concept of concentration was necessary. It was all about just they'll last forever how long they last.
Okay.
So it goes out. If it's only going to last 2 rounds,
then it just does.
It's going to last 2 rounds.
Yeah. I'm curious if they had the concept of save ends earlier too. So like when it comes to something like Hold Person, like they can try and save out of it every single turn. I wonder if they had anything where the players could try and resist every single turn from stuff like that back in the day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Marty has also discovered how D&D is just meme. It's just all a bunch of memes. All spells are just memes and spell components.
Oh yeah. Just I love that.
Just memes and real, like, again, it's like the concept of you're just basically like smoke and mirrors. All of it's quite literally just stupid smoke and mirrors and just. But I do like it though, because if you think about it, it's like, yes, if you just look at like some of the components for what they are, it does make a lot of sense. Like it is just fake. But then where would the real actual magic come from? Is it would have to have a spark, right? It'd have to have like the base point. So it would make sense that you would take the closest real thing and then apply magic to it to make it do the thing you want, right? Like the representation.
That's fair enough.
It is memes and it is like funny jokes, but at the same time, it does also represent the mortal's connection to magic. It has to, magic has to have a funnel. It has to have a focal point. So what better focal point than the things work? A straw reed with a hole through it to breathe underwater. Well, what is that other than breathing underwater with a straw? Like, that's how you would do it. So you're telling the magic,
this is what I need you to do.
I need to focus on it. And the only way to focus is to hold the reed and imagine you're doing that. And now you're telling the magic, oh, that's what you want. That's how I've always envisioned it. So yes, they're funny, but that's kind of how magic feels like it should work. It's not this, you're not just like racing into the ether and being like, if I say this random collection of noises, I've learned something happened, right? It's more like I want this to happen. I know magic, I feel it here. How do I get it to do this? And it's a process of you molding it like clay. And the more you have like a reference point, I think that's the idea, right? The more reference you have, the easier the magic flows into that vessel you're trying to create.
There's this guy I watch on TikTok, and he like loves explaining comic books and just like stuff about comic books. He does a really good job. And you know, he recently did this video where he actually ended up talking a little bit about the difference between magic and science, specifically in the comic book world.
Yes.
Right. Because he was talking about like Doctor Strange and like all that kind of stuff and how they're applied differently. And I forget exactly how he put it. I want to go back and watch it again so bad just to figure it out. But basically he said one is more practical and mathematical, and one is more emotional and like creative and more like artwork. And so it's like when it comes to magic, like we were talking about earlier, it's almost like you're molding the magic into what you believe it should be. And so like your belief towards it can almost stop you from being able to cast it or for being able to use it, because like your psyche and your attitude and your mental capacity towards it. So kind of like what you're talking about is like you tell the magic what it's supposed to do. Like, you almost like feel in your body what it would be like if you were breathing through this straw. And it's like, I'm envisioning that the magic is doing that for me, no matter how deep I go, no matter how far, like the same effect is occurring.
Exactly.
So I totally get that.
It's literal mind over matter.
Yes.
You're turning the magic into matter with your mind. So
I really want to look that up and remember what he said, because he said it really, really well.
Let's see what's going on. Fireball is literally just the formula to gunpowder. Yeah, like it's the two powders, I think.
Wild. Wild.
The component for dark vision's a carrot.
Freaking,
again, it's funny,
memes,
but
man.
it also makes sense because you got to think where they put this stuff together, right? Like they're
yeah.
literally just real life. Because I mean, you don't want to make these things like you don't want to make the thing for dark vision, red obsidian. It just sounds too fanatical, like too fantastical. Yeah. But you don't really think about it when you hear it's a carrot, and you're like, oh, that's cute. And then if you think about it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. And then you're like, wait a second. Like, there's that level of it makes sense, and that's why we don't question it. But a lot of the times, if it were too fanatical if it were too fantastical, it would almost just be it would almost turn into flavor text. No one would care because no one's going to memorize these weird words.
Right.
But when you think of, a carrot, you're like, oh, I can go get a carrot. I get that. Like,
right.
It's more relatable, and I think there's a subconscious, oh, that makes sense. But we don't think about it consciously. We don't sit there and go, oh, carrots improve your eyesight, dark vision, ha ha ha. It's just more of you're somewhere in your brain, you're like, okay, carrot for dark vision, let's go. Like, you don't question it because there's nothing to question. Somewhere in your brain, it made a link, and you're like,
guess this is what's happening.
Yeah, because I can't remember the last time. There have been spells, but it's very rare that I hear a spell and it describes like its material component, and I just go,
what and why?
I didn't hear that. I need to turn up my volume, but someone just used the TTV.
Oh, see, I wish we could have some of our alerts be a little bit louder than our music, just so we would.
I can do that. I just need to figure out where my volume for my alerts is. I think it's in Stream Elements. Oh wait. Yeah, how would I do that? I don't know. I'm gonna have to look into that. How I will make my alerts louder.
No worries.
But I don't know what. So you were saying that for Ray strength is Nano Machine Boy? Who is Nano Machine Boy?
Nano Machine Boy. Unless you're talking about Cyborg from like Teen Titans or something like that.
I don't know, yeah. But the spell Ray strength, apparently, he was talking about the material component for it. So I'm curious what that is.
What's the spell?
Ray strength.
Ray strength.
I don't know if it's Ray strength or increased strength. I don't know what the actual spell is.
I don't see any spell called anything strength.
Mages, I don't know. Well,
it might be a newer spell. Because I know that a lot of the 2024 stuff has new things in it.
Oh, Metal Gear Governor Armstrong meme. I have been out of the loop of Metal Gear memes in a long time.
Oh, wild.
Oh, Ray's attribute. Gotcha. That would make more sense. All right, so we ended with 4th edition for concentration. So 5th edition, That's what brought back our the more, or what brought us to the more official concentration. This is when we had the first official rule set of 1 at a time. So 5th edition was like, nah, none of this crap that you guys getting to stack. 1 concentration at a time is what 5th edition finally said.
Got you. And it just blanketed concentration to be the one thing.
Yes,
not like looking at it.
It's based off of whatever spell it is. If it has concentration, that means it's only going to be 1 of those at a time. It does go. Then they did change the concentration check. So a DC of 10 or half the damage taken, whichever is higher. And then the interruption and challenges concentration can also be broken by if you're incapacitated, casting another concentration spell, or certain environmental effects like being submerged in water while casting a fire-based spell. So they also really went away from the concept of interruptions. Like, you really basically have to be like physically stopped in what you're doing to be interrupted casting a spell. So way different because the other ones, you can be stung by a bee or something, right? Like, you can have a fly in your face and you'd be stopped. This one, you basically have to be put underwater or knocked the fuck out for you to stop casting your spell.
Interesting. I do think, well, see, that would be kind of hard though. Because, like, imagine if you're within melee distance of somebody and you're able to, like, use an opportunity attack to hit them anytime they're casting a spell. I think that would be, what's that?
Like a reaction.
Like a reaction.
I'm going to hold my attack, and if they start casting a spell. Bam.
Well, no, but like, so if I cast, or if I well, is it just disadvantage? Because I was pretty sure what would happen if I would try to do a ranged attack next to a melee opponent, they can do I thought they could do an opportunity attack, or is it just that I just get disadvantage?
I think you just get disadvantage. I don't think there's an opportunity attack. I think it's just an advantage.
Might be true. That might be true. Interesting. Okay.
All right. So yeah. So with concentration, yeah, definitely a very interesting like ride in terms of them formalizing this idea, because this is one of those ones where it does seem like it was a product of balancing, where they didn't really think of it at first. It was kind of just, let spells do what spells do.
Mm-hmm.
But it was constantly being tweaked towards this to help balance and fix what players were really getting away with. Which is interesting, because I feel like a lot of the times that we do the history ofs and we look at some of these things, I feel like a lot of the times they're either more naturally developed or evolve, or that they're more core ideas that they want to flesh out. This feels like it was more of a necessity that was built in than it was something that they were like, hey, this sounds like how magic should work. It was more like okay, no, we need to tweak that.
We need to stop certain things from happening.
Okay, now they can't keep layering it, right? Like it seemed like they were always reaching for a better solution, and this is what they finally landed on. Not that this was a mechanic that they thought was, by itself needed. This
right.
Because there was an issue, not because they just thought it was a cool concept.
I agree.
All right, and then the last thing we wanted to talk about, almost at 3 hours, this will be good. This will be a good way to end it. So I did want to briefly go over the history of cantrips as well, because cantrips kind of fall into this, little category, almost the opposite of concentration, right? Requires almost nothing of you. So I wanted to kind of look into, what cantrips are all about, because they do have kind of an interesting history. Now, it's funny because in some references, you'll hear that cantrips were officially introduced in 5th edition, but that's not officially technically true. Cantrips as official spells is what 5th edition introduced.
They got their name in 5th edition, so to speak.
Yes. Cantrips were actually used, like the name cantrip was used much earlier, but what we know is them today, an actual like labeled spell that has a labeled effect, that's all 5th edition. But where did cantrip come from? Or at least when was the first time we heard it? We actually heard the first term cantrip back in the 80s. It was the supplement Unearthed Arcana. So this was after, this was in the 1st edition. So in the era of AD&D, as the supplements were coming out to help expand the story, and expand what they could do. Unearthed Arcana, 1985, supplemental for AD&D first edition. Cantrips were first introduced as a way to fill out lower level mages and fill out a little bit more lore behind the idea that if I work with magic all the time, why can I only do magic when I'm fully ready?
Right.
Like, why can't there be any?
There should be some sort of middle ground.
Right. So they wanted to help boost and flesh out low level magic and get the lore, and even help like offer up the idea of like magic inclined but not magic user.
Okay.
So the idea behind you could have
basic magic.
Yeah, you could have an affinity to magic, but you didn't do magic.
Like there were a lot of races that got cantrips and things like that, and maybe like one first level spell or something like that.
Exactly. So this was kind of like where they wanted to go with that, right? So with that, a big reason too was that after, or not after, but since OD&D and first edition, when they first came out as their core rule sets, a lot of people were struggling at lower levels with the concept of being a one and done character. So if you're talking about first level, second level, third level wizard, you get one or two spells off and you're done for the rest of the fight. So this was another thing that they wanted to introduce in this supplemental to help ease the tension at those early levels, to give you more than just that one thing you can do, right?
Okay.
So they wanted to help with that. But there were, so what do I have here? Right. So this was because in the core rule set, the idea of an at-will ability, something that you can just perform without any prerequisite or any, preamble, without any prep, wasn't really available. And that's where they realized like low-level magic users are really at a disadvantage, because everybody basically can wake up and start doing stuff.
Yes,
they're the only
very
ones
much
that can't,
so.
and once they're done, they're just
you sucks to suck. Yeah.
So cantrips were a way that this supplemental tried to ease that. So Unearthed Arcana brought us the first concept of cantrips, and they were introduced to basically give minor magical abilities at lower levels and into the greater world.
Okay.
Cantrips were defined as minor spells that mages or wizards were allowed to learn without casting or expending their magic.
Spending resources.
No prep required, no memorization. These were things you were just allowed to do. So kind of what we think of in terms of cantrips now.
Right.
This wasn't spells. These weren't combat. This was just quality of life stuff that you could do. Low level magic,
mending, prestidigitation.
Outside of combat, it makes you feel like a real wizard. Because again, if you only knew 2 spells, then what are you other than that? Other than your personality, what are you? This gave you versatility beyond. Because again, if you memorized fireball and invisibility, well, sucks to suck if you guys are starving. You don't have bless food and water or create food and water.
Yeah.
But something like cantrips allowed you to like light torches and do little things that made you versatile. Beyond just that one spell. So with this, they were able to learn these abilities, cast without expending any of their powers. But of course, there was high limitations early on. So these were a lot of utility effects. And you actually mentioned one before, but like prestidigitation and mending, right?
Yeah.
So the first ones that we thought of, we would think of as prestidigitation now, but like cleaning an object was a very common cantrip in or an example of what an arcana. So
that again?
Like cleaning an object, like taking an object and just being able to dust it off, right? Like let me see that lamp. Now it's shiny. Or I have dirt on me, and then just being able to like clean your clothes. Small mending, being able to mend a small tear, not like repair armor, but repair a seam or a cut. Lighting small flames, creating a distracting noise, right? So we're not talking about being able to make it sound like you guys are an army, but maybe you make it a sound like you threw a rock, or you make some whispers over there, or it sounds like a tree branch snapped, right? Those are things that you'd be able to do with these cantrips, right? We have those cantrips now, right? We have dancing lights, we have create flame, we have we have cantrips that like prestidigitation lights torches, or lets you create sounds, right?
And it lets you do the cleaning and
So yeah, so basically,
or soiling, which is kind
we
of
just
cool.
didn't have the name for it. It wasn't a single cantrip, but that's basically the origins of both prestidigitation and cantrips. It started out as just you could just do things magically that would help you out throughout your world, right? So that's kind of where the idea began. But there was a caveat though. You were limited to how many of these things that you could do. You know, like there wasn't a lot of examples of what you could do with this low level magic, but you didn't just get to do all of it. You still technically had, there was, most people didn't use it this way. Most people just kind of let people use it openly, but officially in Unearthed Arcana, you still technically had to prepare your cantrips. So like you had to say, I want like the cleaning one. I want the mending one.
Oh, okay.
And you still had so many you could cast in a day. So while they weren't official like spells and they were just low level abilities, it was like you could do, you know, cantrips. You could have like 5 cantrips today. And then you say, okay, well, I want cleaning and mending. And I want like 2 of each, right? So it would be that. You'd only have so many things you can cast. You still had to prepare it, but it was low level magic that didn't affect your actual spell list.
Interesting.
So it says it didn't expend it, but it still kind of had that mechanic. So it was trying to expand it and give a little bit more than what we had.
I get it. You know, and when you're testing this kind of stuff out, you don't want to give too much and then have to like backpedal and take it back away. Although at certain situations, that's what we did when it comes to concentration and stuff like that. So
exactly, yeah. So yeah, it was very interesting that you still kind of had to prep them, but at least they started like the idea of, hey, and again, it wasn't a core rule set, it was in a supplemental, but they were like, hey, we get it, you're kind of weak. Let's give you the ability to just do stuff, you know, while you're out and about. So with second edition, they definitely understood that this was definitely a valued aspect of the supplement. Second edition core didn't announce cantrips any differently. Like they didn't like, you know, restate anything in terms of the core rulebook. But they did, in a core, they did want to keep what Unearthed Arcana had kind of built upon. Or
so they wanted to make it more official.
Yeah. So essentially what second edition did is they liked the idea of the cantrips. They wanted to keep them very low powered and keep them available, but they still didn't want it to be full on do this whenever you want. It wasn't just, now granted, I will say from experience, that is how most people still ran it by second edition. For sure, by second edition, cantrips were like ammo. No one counted it after a while.
Got you.
Like after a while, it was like, look, I'm not going to have you only get to clean dirt 3 times. Like, I'm not, who cares? We're dealing with more important storylines here. I don't have a counter for that.
Very much so.
That's my experience, but it was official that you still had a certain number of them in terms of they weren't just free to use, but they were also considered weaker versions of first level spells. So second edition was like, take any first level spell and drop it down a peg. And now so they try to expand the what cantrips could do.
I'm curious if they ever had healing as a cantrip, because theoretically you might have, because I know that's a very dangerous area in
Definitely,
5th edition
because it's
now, because it is fully spammable. But with these limitations, I'm curious if that was ever, and like you said, it's basically just a watered down version of some first level spells. I could totally see that.
Yeah,
at least being a possibility.
I mean, with second edition, they didn't do any like healing because again, most of second edition was for roleplay purposes, was for narrative purposes. A lot of it was really not meant at all for combat. It was meant for utility. Sure. And because again, back in the, I mean, considering, you know, what edition we're talking about too, these are the editions that focus the most on story. You know, most on roleplay, the most on dialogue and intrigue and what's actually happening. These are the ones that focus the least on combat. So that's the other approach we have to understand from this is for them, these were more to help flesh out how you play in the world, not how you win in fights.
Right. Interesting.
So with third edition, now we get more formalized cantrips. This is where we officially mark the beginning of what 5th edition is going to do and turn these into official spells.
Okay.
So I guess I was wrong. Technically, 5th edition wasn't the one that made them locked in spells. And technically, it was 3rd edition because 3rd edition counted cantrips as 0 level spells.
Oh, got you.
3rd edition was what told us cantrips are spells of a 0 level. So it's the first transition into locked in spells.
Got it.
They were categorized as 0 spells. The weakest tier of magic, wizards and sorcerers could prepare a small number of cantrips each day, given they had access to minor spells. So again, still in the Vancian concept of preparing, still at a limited number, but they were to help you just open up your spell list to be more utility instead of just, okay, I can be invisible. Let's only wait until we don't need to be seen. Like,
right.
Not as situational. So yeah, prestidigitation, light became staples for everybody. So again, just the most useful utility ones. So you didn't have to bother with the rest of the party. Small advantages, but nowhere game breaking or combat oriented. And sorcerers and cantrips, because sorcerers were just introduced in 3rd edition. Cantrips worked differently for sorcerers than it did for wizards. Sorcerers did not have to prepare any spells in advance, so including their cantrips. So they were able to cast all of their known cantrips spontaneously, giving them more flexibility than wizards.
And this was 3rd edition?
Yes.
Okay.
But they still had a limited number they can cast in a single day. So they had all of them, no preparation. So just like everything else, they still had all of them available, but still at a limited number that they can cast in any particular day.
Okay.
Fourth edition. What did we do with 4th edition? So again, 4th edition gave us the at-will powers in general, the at-will powers / actions. So that kind of replaced the need for cantrips in terms of a category because you already had the at-will abilities. And they were just, they were the equivalent of those lower levels. So So 4th edition surprisingly actually did something to cantrips for the first time. 4th edition officially and technically was the first edition to categorize cantrips as no limit and at will. Now, even though they had the at will abilities, there were still cantrips.
Cantrips different than at will abilities?
Well, because there were still, those were the ways that you acted in game, but they were still considered leveled spells and they were still cantrips. But what 4th edition did was they were the first one to say, hey, if it's a cantrip, you have no limits on how many you can cast. So while you may only be able to cast at will and encounter powers, but you can only cast 5 spells today. So they could be at will or encounter, but you still only get 5.
Oh.
But with cantrips, they are unlimited. It was the first. So 4th edition, for the first time, actually, 4th edition gave us something not only good, but that lasted and did. And
that got carried over to another edition.
Yes, because usually they go away from form and then 5th edition comes back. But yeah, so cantrips as at will powers. 4th edition was the first one to say, hey, you don't have any limits. These are truly unlimited, at will, as much whenever.
Okay.
And that was pretty much the biggest changes from 4th edition. And then, of course, 5th edition gives us what we know now. So cantrips were made truly at will. So 5th edition saw what 4th edition did to it and say, you know what? That makes sense. No caps on your cantrips casting, right? If you know it, you know it. You have the combat ready cantrips for the first time. So this is where I originally misspoke and said 5th edition introduced cantrips the way that we know them now. Technically that was 3rd edition because they had 0 level, but 5th edition was the one that said, hey, not only do we like what 4th edition did and we want you to have them repeatedly, but 5th edition said we don't like the fact that they're utility and roleplay only. 5th edition was the first one that said we want you to have combat oriented cantrips.
Right. We want you to be able to do damage. We want you to be able to actually feel like. So even in 4th edition, there was no well, the at will powers were probably damage dealing, but none of the actual
cantrips.
Okay.
Cantrips were considered lower level 0 spells, so all weak. So 5th edition was the first one that says, nah, let's put out some damage. Let's put out healing. Let's actually make this combat. But again, 5th edition is all about combat. So why would they not, well, there doesn't make much sense for them to keep a mechanic that's roleplay heavy when their entire system is built on combat. Right. So again, you can kind of get where the influences are. And I love that whenever we do the history of, you can always tell where the focus is based on how the rule sets are working. You can always tell first and second edition are way more about the story. Fifth edition's always way more about the combat. And third edition's trying to just learn where's the balance. You know what I mean? I feel like that's always what it is third edition's trying to get us to more combat with maintaining the story. And first and second edition, we're like, yeah, combat's here. It's cool. But what about the story? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go? You know what I mean? Like I feel like each edition has that, like that draw to it. Of course, we kept utility and role-playing cantrips, but obviously combat-focused cantrips were definitely 5th edition's bread and butter. And 5th edition officially allowed everyone, all spellcasters, to have cantrips. So wizards, sorcerers, clerics, druids, didn't matter. Gotcha. Everyone finally got access. No locks on cantrips, no limits on cantrips, and now you can use cantrips whenever and wherever.
Yes. I'm curious if any of the other, because I know in 5th edition at least, cantrips is something they're almost kind of, I don't want to say hoarded or valuable, but it's like you can only get so many of them. So traditionally, a standard spellcaster is not going to get more than like 6 cantrips by the time they get to level 20. You start off with like 1 or 2 cantrips, and now granted you can get cantrips easily from a lot of other sources. You can get them from feats, you can get them from races like we talked about, you can get them from all different types of places, but generally speaking, throughout your standard base class, you're only going to get so many. I'm curious if the scaling of how you could get cantrips, well, because like you said, a lot of the times in the older editions, people just said you can use as many of them as you like, and like
most of the time it was just played as long as it wasn't trying to break it, you were free. You
could just do stuff.
Yeah, you were free to just, because again, it was more of just the knee jerk in the moment. I'm just going to do it, and no one really was. Again, I look at it as mundane ammo. Like no one, after a certain level, after a certain gaming campaign, it's not. No one's caring if you spent 6 arrows or 7 arrows this round. You're gonna buy up when you go to town, you know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of how I feel about that. So yeah, the cantrips are a trip, man. Like it's fascinating to see, again, not just the focuses of each edition, but the way they went about trying to balance it for the player.
Yes. And I think a lot of the times these especially the different deep dives we go into, like, and I kind of like the fact that we do them separately, because it shows like, okay, this is how this aspect of magic has changed. Yes, it's all spellcasting, but as spellcasting is so broad and it covers so much, and
we didn't cover half of this stuff in any of the other 7 episodes.
Exactly.
Of
we
Histories of Magic.
We barely talked about concentration when it came to any of the other spells. You theoretically have concentration in ritual casting. You definitely have it with some of the meta magic stuff. You can like, so it could have been anywhere, but like, because a lot of these topics, they have such a rich individual history, it's like, how are you gonna go through all that stuff? I mean, you were looking through, what was it? Was it Druid where you first were like,
then Prestige?
Like, this is gonna be its whole thing. Like, I gotta have to do this on its own. So like, that's lightweight what a lot of this stuff is. So I kind of like the fact that as we see new aspects of whatever it is, spell casting, classes, whatever, like we're like, all right, let's dive into what this looks like,
and being able to actually see the changes, being able to see just like what it's doing, what their influences are. I always have fun with this. So this was really interesting to look at that. Another thought to end with before we go here, because we are past the 3-hour mark, so I think just end a small little tangent here.
Sure.
You were bringing up the idea of like cantrips being valued and kind of hoarded. You only get so many. Almost what I would like to do though, because cantrips, because you only get so many, and there really, in my opinion, aren't that many cantrips available. Like it never really seems like there's that many to choose from.
Yeah.
I almost wish, outside of expanding the list, like we'd love to see an expanded list, right? But realistically, I guess, unfortunately, when you think of that low level magic, if it's not combat oriented, what doesn't fall under prestidigitation? But
I mean, lightweight, yeah.
But one thing I would like to look at is an alternative rule, either for the player who wants a little bit of an extra challenge, or a home rule for DMs who are getting kind of tired of people just always choosing Eldritch Blast or something like that.
Yeah.
What if you made, when you created your character, cantrips were rolled for? It's the only spell that you don't choose.
Interesting.
So like if you wanted a list, you'd be like, well, which one you would roll for, which ones you have on your list, and then those are the ones you prepare. But the idea is like, you don't get to choose at level 1, I'm getting Eldritch Blast. You're like, okay, you get one cantrip, roll. Which cantrip do you get?
No.
Okay, that's the one you get at this level.
Are you saying you roll for what's known, or are you rolling for what's prepared?
What's known.
Interesting.
Because I like the idea of like, because especially if you, at least if you wanted to do this, split it out into like, make sorcerers and warlocks do it. You know, people who aren't knowing how they're doing their magic, right? People who just do magic. I think that could be kind of interesting, right? Because a mage would know what their cantrip is, right? They prepared it. That's all their magic is. But a sorcerer, I kind of like the idea that if you have this innate ability, right? You have innate magic. I kind of like the idea that when you discovered it, the very first thing you discovered how to do regularly was a cantrip. But you didn't know you could cast magic until you cast magic, right?
Sure.
So I like the idea, at least for like a sorcerer, the first spell you ever cast was the first cantrip, but you didn't decide what that was going to be. You had to figure out what you could do, right? You could kind of like, the idea of like some of the animes where it's like, you get into a new body and you're like, well, I have to just test and figure out what I can do until I learn it. I kind of like that idea for cantrips, where if they are these innate things that you can just do, it actually makes more sense that you don't even know what they are, or, you don't choose them. It's not like you learned them. You just were able to do them from the get-go.
I definitely do like that idea, especially, we were talking earlier about like wild magic sorcerers and stuff like that. Like, imagine if they didn't know what spells like they were going to get the next time around, or whatever the case may be. I would like it to be like at the very least within a category, because imagine, if you're this like great damage dealing spell, but like the only cantrips are like mending and prestidigitation, and you would like,
I get the feel,
you just not use
bad,
them,
but that's why it's like, but then again, it's just cantrips, right? Like, and realistically, that's fair. I think it just breaks up, because if you give them the choice, you pretty much know what they're going to choose. I kind of like breaking it up, because it is kind of weird. What if you are not the aggressor? What if you are the buffer, but literally you were born with Eldritch Blast? So the idea almost is, I wanted to be a healer. It's like, good, you're going away from that instinct. You literally, the very first magic you ever did was harmful, and you were like, I can't ever do that again. That could be part of your character development, is like, nope, I learned Eldritch Blast and I decided I wanted to become a healer. Or what if you are this major damage dude, but then you get prestidigitation, or you get something else, right? Like, yes, it's not part of your build, but that's kind of how magic is, right? It's unpredictable. And I wouldn't want it for all of your magic, but I do kind of think on occasion the idea of not being able to choose your cantrip makes a little more sense.
I feel like I agree. I think that I would probably tie that more
for the player.
I feel like I would tie that more to the background than I would to the class, right? Because, seeing like where you came from, or how you came about your magic, or how you came about.
Even though mages and wizards have to memorize and study, what if the cantrip was what got them to start studying? They were like, wait, I can do that.
Imagine like a feature of your background was like maybe this background is only chosen by a spellcaster of some sort, and a feature of that background is whatever cantrips are chosen at random, or something like that, because of whatever history that you came from, or wherever it is that you're getting it. Like, I totally like that.
At bare minimum, I like it as a optional role for players to choose.
Yeah,
like when they go into the character creation and be like, hey, I want to take the variant cantrip rule where I roll for cantrips, just to give yourself a new outlet to get, like we were just said, give yourself a new way to tell your character's backstory.
Right.
If you want to make a healer, and then you roll and get a damage die, or a damage cantrip, maybe you use that to tell why you're a healer, right? Or you just want the you don't want to min max, right? So you just want the whole let's see what happens. Let's see if I get damage. Let's see if I get healing.
Right.
Let's see if I'm just a trickster, right? Like I do kind of like, because that's how I would be as a player. If I had a DM and they offered that as a, hey, you can just, I mean, granted, I don't know what DM would turn that down if you just went up to him and said, hey, I want to roll my, for my cantrips. But that's
roll,
not,
baby, roll.
That's not really an idea a player would come up with, right? I think like offering it to them and be like, hey, I have an optional roll for spellcasters. All cantrips are rolled for, kind of spices things up. And it's part of the whole innate magic isn't your choice. Innate magic is innate. You learned everything else. But this is something, so just something like that I think could make it better. But I do agree at the same time, we could have more cantrips in general.
Sure. Yeah, most definitely. I was even going to say like,
Marty, you're absolutely right. Warlocks are built for Eldritch Blast.
Very much so. They're like, listen, I feel like I lightweight, kind of like Rangers in their Hunter's Mark. I feel like it should be a class feature instead of a spell.
It really should be.
I almost think like Eldritch Blast is,
or like, how like the subclasses that'll say these spells don't count towards your max.
Oh yeah.
Why isn't Eldritch Blast just not counted towards your max? Like it should just be something that comes with an Eldritch God. Or again, what if like you just had categories of God? If you chose from the Warlock, if you chose an Eldritch God, you get Eldritch Blast. If you chose a different type of creature, maybe there would be a different category of automatic, like, I don't remember all the cantrips off the top of my head, but
right.
Like depending on the deity or the entity you follow as a warlock, maybe there was a default guaranteed cantrip. So again, sorcerers could roll for it, wizards always get to choose, and warlocks, it's based on the category of patron. Like that would be great.
Interesting.
That would actually make it more versatile and actually make each of the classes feel more alive. Because then their magic would absolutely make sense from the get-go. So if you wanted to be able to choose everything, then you have to be a mage because you studied every last bit. If you want a little bit of spice, but you still want to learn yourself, that's where you get the sorcerer. But if you just kind of want
I want my stuff outlined for me, you could go that route.
Yeah. So
okay,
these are the things that I think that we could do better in terms of building out spellcasters, because I really think that the list of spells are too generic and not real. Like I really don't feel like building a spellcaster is really that different every single time. Like anytime I build a spellcaster, I really don't feel like I'm getting a different experience. I'm getting a different character, but I'm not getting a different spellcasting experience.
Yeah, I kind of get what you're saying. Like, I'll say the biggest difference for me is like how I play it, whether I'm, DPS, whether I'm a support character, whether I'm crowd control, like that, like how I use the character. But outside of that, like you still manage your spells the same. You still,
and essentially with a couple minor adjustments to spell lists, you unlock spells the same at the same pace. And again, even if you're good at not being the kind of player that always ends up doing the same exact thing every time, even if you don't do that, there are times where you're going to get into a meta. If you're always met with the same spell lists at the same spell levels, there's always going to be some spells that you just naturally will never choose. Like it's hard to say that, but it's like most people subconsciously, there are just going to be things, no matter what the build is, you as a person will look at a spell and go, that doesn't make sense, I won't use it. Right? And that's kind of that problem, is there are certain things as spellcasters, and that's where it comes down to me. Whenever I build out a spellcaster, unless you drastically change my spell list, I don't see it that much differently, because even though I will approach what spells differently for the character, I still look at the entire spell list in the same way. I still have already categorized some spells as useless, some spells as OP, and other spells as fun.
And that's why I like the idea of kind of what Hecate is doing. And a lot of these subclasses come with their own spell lists. It's like, hey, here's the stuff you can use for this that makes it feel like you're this thing, right? That makes it feel like you're not just one of the other guys that are out there. And so I definitely like that sort of experience. Like I would love it if all of those ice spells were exclusive to that subclass, or exclusive to anything that is ice oriented, right? Like you don't really get to, like, I feel like it would be so cool, like with the exception of wizards, because wizards, I feel like should be able to like
learn anything, right?
Exactly.
Like the whole point is they can study it and learn it.
But like sorcerers especially, like that would be so cool if like your spell list, like kind of like you were saying, like your spell lists are catered. I feel like warlocks would be great for that too.
Put that into the ADMG list. Let's do improved spell lists.
Okay.
So we'll do what we think is a more catered list, because we'll take all of the known spells, and obviously there's going to be some overlap, right? Some spells will be universal, some spells will be categorized, but I think we could also just expand upon what spells should be in certain categories. And it may be the same spell, just worded differently for each category, right? Like we may get one spell, but instead of it being one spell that's universal, maybe we alter it because it's like, it would make sense depending on who's casting it.
Like, I think that lightning bolt is a very good equivalent to fireball when it comes to lightning spells versus, they're both AoE spells.
Yeah.
They're both relatively the same power strength, like as far as the damage you're gonna do. Granted, like one's more situational than the other, but you know, like fireball's just gonna get a big room, you know, you got a lot more like options for it.
And I don't
like,
want necessarily every class or every version to have the same spell. I don't want fireball with every single one, or a version, right? I don't want the lightning to basically have fireball but just does lightning damage. I don't want water to have fireball but does poison damage, right? That's not what I want. I don't want them all to have the equivalent, because then they should just share the same fucking spell.
Exactly.
But what I do want is, you know, you have fireball, but then I want like for like if you have an ice focused person, I want them to have no access to fireball at all. But I want them to have access to something that no one else can do because you don't specialize in this. Like I really want to, we should dig in more to like an improved lists where it makes you feel specialized. Like, when you say I'm an illusionist, I'm a fire sorcerer, I'm I'm an ice mage. When you say these things, you should be the best at your craft, and you should be able to do things that no one else can. Oh, maybe we do that too. Maybe we can do categories of spells as well, to where you can have like common or universal spells that don't really have like any category. And then you can do like, or I guess, you know, common as in they can have multiple categories, right? Like multiple types of, like multiple overlaps, multiple types of people could cast them. But then you have like a third category, which is like a restricted category, which would only be spells that fall to those specialties, right?
Okay.
So having different categories to where it's like some make sense to be universal for anybody, some make sense to have certain overlaps but not others, and then some spells that are isolated only for that. So yeah, 3 levels of spells I think would be interesting for us to improve that. Cool. Interesting ideas. And Hecate says we have a new submission.
Oh, it's in there?
Nice.
I love it.
Yes. All right. So we have a new submission. And speaking of submissions, what can the good folks out there in the community look forward to on Monday?
Let us take a quick gander.
You know, everybody wants to know what the next.
Everybody's got to know. Everybody's got to know. Alrighty then. Next up on Moonday is going to be, you're gonna have to help me with the pronunciation of this, Marty. But this is going to be the
Sali?
Salia. Yes. Yes. Sahali.
I remember they posted it previously. I think it's 3 sounds.
They did.
I don't think it's Sali. I think there's 3. Is it consonants? No, not 3 consonants, but there's 3.
I'm going to syllables.
Syllables. Yes.
Syllables.
I think
Yes.
it's 3
yes.
syllables, not 2.
So I'm gonna see if they did that. Then I should have it in my my notes from the
Maybe
last.
It was Sahali. Was it Sahali?
Did they do it in Discord or did they do it in?
I don't remember where they did it.
I'm gonna
They
check.
might have done it in the home brewing. I think that's what he was. I think it was one of his chats I saw in home brewing. Your back-to-back one with him.
Oh,
I think it's in there.
okay.
Okay. So the S is by itself. Is its own. So it's Ali. So
Oh,
seems like it's a build up there. So
got you. All right.
hopefully we'll pronounce that better on Monday. But that's yeah. So Marty, that is Marty's first, right?
That is going to be their first.
All right.
Yes. And I did
Marty's
clarify.
first
So
review.
theoretically, even though they only sent one submission, there are 4 separates that are
So
going to
these
be
are
in there.
Sub races, right? So there's going to be like, we have a category of race, and then it has
Yes.
like a handful of races. So we're going to do one category, but we're going to do all like 3 or 4 sub races underneath it.
Correct.
More of a, this is a race, and then these are the categories that you get. So that's what we're going to do.
Just like with elf, you got, you got your high elf, you got your wood elf, and you got the same thing with dwarves. You got all these different versions of dwarf, and they have just like slight different variances,
Yeah.
but like a majority of the things are going to be the same. Although I feel like with these, there are a little bit more in variation, but it's like, hey, one's got 20-foot movement speed, one's got 25-foot movement speed.
Cool.
It's nothing like too crazy.
Fantastic. All right. So we're going to do the this Ali first. Is that the, I know that there was different types. So which one is this?
Yes.
This is the aquatic one?
No, I believe this one is going to be the insect one.
Oh, the insectoids?
It's either insectoids or the reptilians. It's one of those two.
Okay. So we have 2 different types, right? Because we have sub races, but we either have 4 insectoid sub races or 4 reptile. I think this one's the reptile one. I'm pretty sure.
Reptilian.
Yes. Okay.
Confirmed.
So yeah. So this will be 4 reptilian sub races, all in the same race.
And then the last 2 submissions are going to be like standalone races.
Ooh. So we have all races. So it's all races.
So we have the first one. This one is going to have a couple sub races. The next submission is going to have a couple of sub races, and the last 2 are just going to be individual races.
All right. Interesting. Okay. Cool. So we have a reptilian sub race. Marty's first submission coming in on Monday. So be here for that.
Very nice.
Again, in just not even 10 days now, in 9 days, we have the next community stream.
Oh, yeah.
So that is going to be on Sunday, October 20th. There is still a poll in Discord to let us know what you guys want to see. So if you guys want to join the Discord and you guys aren't yet, that is in chat right now. Also, if you guys want to follow us on all of the social medias, you guys can do that, posting the link tree in there. You can get our YouTube channel, our TikTok channel, where we do all of our shorts, and you can follow our VODs channel. So if you missed anything today, or if you like our content and want to see any of our other live streams, you can see all of that on YouTube on our VODs channel. But I think that's going to be us for today. It's been a great topic. If you guys have any other topics that you want to hear us talk about, if you want to suggest what you guys want to hear on stream, or if you have your own homebrew, join the Discord, and we have channels for all of that. You guys can post ideas that you guys want to hear about, and then we will do the research. We'll do that, and then if you submit your homebrew every Monday, we'll grab one like we're about to do with Marty, and then we'll give you guys a review for it.
Very nice indeed.
No other major updates, so I think we're just going to leave it clean today. Do we have anybody to raid right now? Is anybody on?
Unfortunately not. There are nobody else online, unfortunately.
Well, no raid out today, folks, but thank you guys so much for joining us. It's been fantastic. We have had a fantastic time. Really enjoyed doing these things for you guys, and I love that you guys show up, interact with us. It's really helpful. Love talking with you guys. Thank you, everybody, for showing up for, all times of day. I mean, we got everybody from morning, evening.
Right. Hoilepa out here first thing in the morning.
7 a.m. Fantastic. Well, hopefully we gave you a good start to your morning. Hopefully it was a good listen to while you got ready for the day. I hope everybody else had a great week. I hope you have a fantastic weekend ahead of you. We will be back on Monday, guys. Cheers.
Deuces, my friends.